Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host, Madeline, and today we have another special episode. So before we get started with the good stuff, we're going to do a few minutes of general housekeeping. We are rounding the corner on hitting the bestseller list for my book debut. So I wanted to let everybody know, if you haven't pre-ordered it yet, Barnes & Noble is doing an awesome promo for us until November 15th. So if you pre-order the hardcover version of the book from their website using the code Pendleton25, that's Pendleton like my name, Pendleton, you get 25% off. And I think that's probably going to be the best deal that we will have for this thing before it officially launches on January 14th. So if you were on the fence about getting it, I think now is probably the time to go for it. It does miss holiday delivery by a few weeks with the release date, but if you wanted to get it as a gift, you could always print out a little picture of it or put a little note in a card or something and just let somebody know that it will be their holiday gift just 2 weeks late or whatever. And the name of the book, if you don't know yet, is I Survived Capitalism and All I Got Was This Lousy T-Shirt. And I will include a link to purchase it in the episode description on this episode. If you're one of our Patreon subscribers, you've probably already seen at least one excerpt from the book. It is a deleted chunk of the book, but it was my 2-week $75 meal plan. And if you're not a Patreon subscriber, we do all sorts of interesting stuff over on the Patreon. There are 2 bonus episodes monthly. October's were how to rent an affordable place to live in a competitive housing market and how to pay off debt. And both are complete with links to Google documents that might help you out with both of these things. There is a template on Google Sheets, I think is the Excel one, where you can plug in all of your debt info. And there is also a guide to the other one, Google Docs, I think, that's like the rental packet I always talk about using to help you secure a place. So that is what is going on over on our Patreon for just $3 per month. That is also where we take all of your episode recommendations as well and just generally try to be helpful. And it is patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. Now, we have another thing to address before we get started, which is our lovely dear Kenna is actually out on an indefinite hiatus for health reasons. So we are not sure when or if Kenna will be back, sadly, but we are keeping her name on the podcast info, like keeping her seat warm in case she returns, and we hope she will. In the meantime, though, we will bring on somebody you guys have really liked on other episodes, David, as our co-host in a more regular capacity, and that will be starting next week. I know a lot of you have loved the episodes with David that we've done in the past. There was our most recent episode on masculinity, which is episode 88, called The Dude Abides. And of course, our episode on the paranormal, which was episode number 48, called Haunted and Loving It. I think that David will be a super interesting co-host for the podcast, because if you don't know, David is my oldest friend. We have known each other 22 years or something like that, and we tend to bicker like siblings. So at the very least, the episodes will have a lot more potential for drama. And I am told that drama makes for peak entertainment. So hopefully you all love that. Today, though, we have the last of our temporary guest hosts on from Kenna's original 4-week hiatus she planned. These are people that I just pulled from my friend group and roped into talking about things that interest them or that they're knowledgeable on. And that means that our final guest co-host for this week is my lovely friend, Torrey. So Torrey, this is where you get to say hi.
Hey, what's up?
So, Torrey, before we get started, I thought it would be good for you to tell people a little about yourself so they know where you're coming from when we talk about today's episode. Let's start off with us. How long have we known each other?
15 years.
Yes, 15 years. And what do you do for a living?
I am a career bartender. I have been working in bars consistently for the last 15 years, starting as a door guy at dive bars in San Francisco and working up to designing cocktail menus for nice restaurants in New York City, but also still working at dive bars.
You do a little of both. You bounce around a few different places. Yeah. And you like it, right?
Yeah. I mean, often I hate it, but that's a kind of passion, right? So I would say I'm passionate about my job.
I like that. I think that's really refreshing, especially because when I first met you, you were just doing the door.
That's right. I wasn't a bartender when we met. Yeah, I was just checking IDs and making sure that people were safe.
Yeah. And my favorite recent story about you being a bartender, because a lot of the time I knew you weren't a bartender before, um, is the time in recent history when you tried to make me an old fashioned because it is my favorite drink, but there was no sugar. So you muddled Cherry Sour Patch Kid to use instead. And I thought that was very innovative. And I also love Sour Patch Kids because they are vegans. So I appreciated that. So I would say you're a creative bartender as well.
All right, you make do with the tools you have. I
What?
once opened a bottle of wine with a shoe.
Wait, what?
Sorry, we can tell that story if you need if we
No,
should
I
continue with
think
the
I know. I
introduction.
want to know about the shoe and the bottle of wine because I
Oh,
recently have been getting into hearing people tell interesting ways they've opened bottles.
uh-huh.
And my friend Kylie, who has given us both tattoos, gave me a whole bunch of interesting ways to open bottles that I had no idea existed. But these were all like a beer bottle, not a
Uh-huh.
wine bottle. How did you open a wine bottle with a shoe?
This one's kind of wild. I mean, obviously the coolest way to open a bottle is sabering, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is when
No,
you
I've never heard of
okay,
this.
wow, okay, we're getting in the weeds already. But there's a way to open a bottle of champagne where you take a sword and you run it along the neck of the bottle, and it literally pops. It finds an imperfection in the glass in the bottle, and it pops the whole top off the bottle. And it's a very dramatic way to open a bottle of champagne. But the shoe one is this was a necessity thing. I was on an island in a tent, but it was like kind of glamping. Not glamping. I don't know. We were camping, but we had internet access, and I was like, "How the hell do I open this bottle of wine?" No one brought a wine key, and there's a way to you put the bottle of wine in a shoe because the cork is impossible to extract. This is before like screw tops were as prevalent as they are. You put the bottle of wine in a shoe and you pound it against a tree, and slowly but surely the inertia causes the cork to push itself out until you literally get it far enough out that you can grab it with your fingers and pull it out.
It's like a reverse hammer. The tree is the
Yeah.
hammer.
Right. And
Wow.
it transmits the force through the bottle into the cork, and just all you need is enough to get a grip on it, and then you can open it up.
Okay, yeah. So I would say you're innovative. Okay, so you said you design cocktails now. You do that. What's like your favorite drink that you have ever designed or come up with?
My favorite drink to drink, or my favorite drink that
Your
I've come
favorite
up
drink
with.
that you've come up with, yeah.
Uh, I don't know. I'm the thing is the coolest cocktails I've made have been when I've been able to collaborate with a kitchen. When I've worked at restaurants and there's a kitchen who is doing cool stuff with food, they often have all these different like there's different waste aspects. And so I think my favorite cocktail was we were making our own ricotta cheese in house, and they were like, "What do we do with all this whey?" Because whey is like, it's just the liquid that comes off the ricotta, and it's like kind of yogurty and sour. And I was able to incorporate that into a cocktail. And it was like a gin-based cocktail, kind of just a sour drink. But it's that kind of stuff is like the most fun, is when you've got ingredients that are unique to the site. Like you're doing something that literally no one else can do because you're the only one with access to this very small amount of ingredients. Unfortunately, it means you can only make so many of those cocktails. Once you run out of that stuff, it's over. So it's ephemeral. I don't know.
I think that's pretty cool. I already know what your favorite drink to order when you go out is,
Yes.
but you say it.
Fernet.
And
Fernet.
you once told me a story about this drink, and you told me this story because one time I took you and Kenna and our friend Fernanda to a super dorky historical speakeasy in Fresno where they teach you about prohibition. and they were sharing like nerdy booze facts, and in some sort of act of like booze nerd solidarity, you explained to us that Fernet was sometimes called, what is it sometimes called?
The bartender's handshake.
Okay, so tell the story of this. We're building a profile so people understand who you are as we get going here.
So that the bartender's hand, it's corny because it is a cliche at this point, but Fernet is a bitter digestif that is, it's from Italy, and it was initially created as one of these things that you drink after dinner to settle your stomach and to promote digestion. Some marketing genius, I guess, started trying to market it in the US. It was already prevalent in Argentina and Brazil. For some reason, it became very, very popular. But anyway, bartenders in San Francisco started drinking it because supposedly it didn't give you a hangover and you could just drink it all night, which of course is not true. All alcohol gives you a hangover. But yeah, it just became popular, and then it became this sort of like signature bartender drink. And so I've walked into bars around the country and ordered a Fernet, and they've asked me, "Are you a bartender? Or are you from San Francisco?" And I'm like, both, unfortunately. Anyway.
Well, I feel like you know a lot of trivia about alcohol, and in general, you're pretty knowledgeable about your craft, and also you are a total fucking nerd, which makes you a perfect guest co-host for the podcast, because we love podcast learning here. So today, in honor of Torrey being our guest host, our podcast episode is going to be all about alcohol. So, Torrey, here's how it's going to go. I've done a bunch of research, and you basically just have to listen to a neurodivergent info dump, but you get to interject whenever you want with responses or tidbits of information or anecdotes or questions. Like, feel free to jump in, feel free to talk over me, whatever. Your job is basically to make sure that this isn't just a lecture at the listeners, and you don't have to worry about being charmy or witty or funny or anything like that. You don't even have to be remotely likable, honestly. If you wanted, you could be like the villain of the Pick Me Up, I'm Scared podcast. But mostly, I'm going to stop when I have questions for you specifically, and you can weigh in on things as we go.
Okay, I am a grumpy nerd, so I think I can handle that part.
I think that's perfect.
I am a little nervous about being outclassed because I'm afraid you have done far more. I have just absorbed all this information over 15 years. I have not done any pointed research, but I'm just going to go with it.
I think that's going to be good. I think it's going to be a good balance, and you don't have to worry. So,
cool.
Are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's get started. So the place I always like to start when I do an episode is with the history of things, because I really like chronology. Like, I want to know a story. But first, there's a bunch of stuff about alcohol I don't really understand. And it seems like I need kind of a baseline knowledge to understand how like alcohol even began to develop in the world. And I think it's something you can explain. So there are all sorts of questions I have, like, how does it get made? And what is fermentation? And what is distillation? Like, what I need help. Please explain those things.
Okay. So yeah, this is actually in my wheelhouse.
Okay, good.
So alcohol is the natural result of fermentation, which is when. So let's put it this way: the first alcohol occurred before humans ever existed. Alcohol fermentation is a natural process, and it happens when yeasts that are in the environment consume sugars and convert them into ethanol, which is alcohol. That is like when people talk about like something is 40% alcohol, they're talking about ethanol, which is very specifically the kind of alcohol that we consume that gets us drunk. So that process happens naturally. I don't know if you ever heard about the monkeys that get drunk on fallen fruit.
No, never.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So fruit can fall to the floor, and then it starts to ferment because the yeast start to consume. And literally there are monkeys who get drunk eating the fruit. So like I said, alcohol predates humanity by as long as yeasts have existed. So possibly millennia. The first alcohol to develop by humanity was certainly an accident. One thing I will say about alcohol in general is that people love to tell stories. And so there's so much apocrypha. There are so many fun stories. This is where this drink came from. This thing happened. And it's mostly bullshit. Like, there is no question. Like, people just love their little stories about how a drink was made or whatever. So everyone says this is the first alcohol. No one really knows is the answer. But yeah, so that's fermentation. And that is the simplest form of creating alcohol. And that is how wine is made. So any, great wine, as we mostly know it, is grape juice fermented into wine. So the grapes have sugar. There's yeast on the skins. You pulverize the grapes so that the juice is released. The yeasts eat the sugar and turn it into alcohol. You strain out the solids, you have wine. That's like the simplest form of alcohol. The next one is brewing, which is beer. Do you really want me to go into this?
Yeah,
I will.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
no, it's great.
The next one is, sorry, it's just, I think I can do a little encapsulation. The next is brewing, which is beer. And the only difference there is that what you have to do is take certain grains, don't have the sugars in the grains are not available to the yeast. And I don't know all about this process because I'm not a beer person, but I have worked with brewers before. And as I understand it, there's a process called malting, and it's, I believe, where you heat the grains until the sugars are readily available to the yeasts. And once those yeasts are once the sugars are available to those yeasts, you can then ferment that, and then you can get beer out of that. I believe, the brewing one I'm a little less clear on because it is actually the most complex. Distillation, which is hard alcohol, spirits, vodka, tequila, whatever, that is a third process. And what that involves is a combination of either the first or second ones, where you have either grains or some sort of sugar from a juice, or, for instance, honey, any available sugars, and you ferment or, go through the process with the yeast to turn that into alcohol. And then you take that resulting juice and you distill it. And that involves applying heat until it boils and removing everything but the alcohol. And so that's why when people talk about triple distilled vodka, they're talking about the process of it's essentially, and again, I have never done this myself. I just know enough about it from my friends who do. So you basically remove both water and any organic materials, and you have something that is as close to possible as purely ethanol. And then in most cases, then you take that ethanol and you dilute it again. So like in the instance of vodka, which is the purest, you take, potatoes, you ferment that, you get the alcohol from that, you take that, and that's it's like a potato juice. And it doesn't have to be potatoes. Vodka can be any grain. We call them neutral grain spirits. But anyway, you take the whatever resulting like slurry of alcohol, and then you purify that through distillation. And again, that's like taking everything out but the ethanol. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I kind of understand. The distillation thing is still a little confusing to me, but I think maybe you'll have opportunities to clarify for me later when I have more specific questions.
Sure.
Okay. So with all this in mind, I'm happy to report that your anecdote about people making up stories about how alcohol started, but it's actually just like been along, longer than humans have existed, that totally matches up with all the research I did. So when talking about like a timeline of alcohol, people say the thing that is so old we don't know how old it is probably beer. And this guy, Patrick McGovern's actually a biomolecular archaeologist at the Penn Museum. And he's also like a longtime authority on ancient fermented beverages. And he said that the first beer probably came from Africa, but that's just a guess because that's where people were. And I thought that was super interesting. It's just like a part of the human experience. And McGovern says we have not found evidence of some sort of Paleolithic African beer. He would call that like the holy grail of fermented beverages, but he's like, yeah, there's no evidence of that. It's just rational to assume that because people were there, beer was there. So McGovern says that he suspects that whatever this beer, as old as humankind, would have been, that it probably would have been made from wild millet or sorghum, which would be, you know, a grain that's pretty widely associated, I guess, with beer making in Africa even today. And it just would have been flavored with whatever was growing nearby. And this probably would have been just an accident, kind of like how you were talking about, like fruit falls on the ground and it naturally ferments, and then the monkeys get drunk on fruit. Yeah, like humans would have figured this out accidentally too. Like a pile of grain would have accidentally sat out in the rain and the sun, and then some wild yeast might have latched onto its sugar, and then a few days later you would have accidentally had beer somehow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's actually interesting because I just realized that I did forget one step of the beer making process, that like the way that any grain gets made into alcohol, which again, as I said before, it's like a 3-stage. If you think of them as 3 stages, you got the fermentation, and then brewing is a little more complicated, but it's just another form of fermentation. The one thing is that you have to malt the grains, and that involves letting them like germinate. They have to like basically process in water for a little bit, and then those starches start to turn into different sugars that are available to the yeast. So yeah, like that can still happen naturally. Like it could be an accidental beer. It doesn't have to be artificial. It's just a little harder to do it. You can't just like grab barley, like just random barley, and make it into beer. You have to like give it a little bit of time and like process, and it involves germination and heat. But yeah.
So the rain and the sun, both essential.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, there's this other person named William Boswick who wrote a 2014 book called The Brewer's Tale. And Boswick said humankind was built on beer, from the world's first writing to its first laws and ritual, social, religious, and political civilization is soaked in beer. And this is just kind of like an explanation that like all of human history is also the same as the history of beer. Like you can't separate the two. And I know I said this already, but it just like really blew my mind because I had no idea that it was such an integral part of the human experience, the desire to get trashed. But
well, there's
sorry.
There's also the whole thing about there have been times when, because of the processing that it went through, beer was safer to drink than the local water.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something we'll talk about a lot coming up, which I also did not realize. So in 2015, this team of Stanford researchers came across a 13,000-year-old either beer or bread making operation in Palestine that would have been used by the Natufian people who lived there at the time. And there were these stone mortars that were in this caves like bedrock floor, and there were carvings in it. And in the carvings, the team found traces of starch that would have been consistent with like some sort of thick wheat and barley based alcohol. So Kirk French, who teaches anthropology of alcohol at Pennsylvania State University, says it makes sense that Natufians would have been brewers because he said they had grain for a long time. And if they weren't making beer, it would be different than every other place in the world that has had stable crops. Like if they have grain, they have alcohol. And that just kind of like hammers home that like, well, yeah, of course they're making alcohol. People are always making alcohol. So when we first start to like get an idea of specific dates that might emerge, because again, this stuff was all like, yeah, as long as people have been around, there's been beer. It probably would be around 10,000 BC because agriculture became prominent in a major way around 12,000 years ago. So according to Scientific American, the creation of agriculture led to food surpluses, which in turn led to even larger groups of people living in close quarters in villages or cities. And this is like a narrative of history that like some anthropologists have kind of thought might be oversimplified at the very least. Like lots of people who are working land in indigenous ways were capable of like creating food surpluses on their own as well, but whatever. This is a pretty commonly accepted anthropological narrative. And Scientific American goes on and says these municipalities faced a problem that still vexes, namely how to provide inhabitants with enough clean, pure water to sustain their constant need for physiological hydration. The solution until the 19th century was non-existent. The water supply of any group of people rapidly became polluted with their waste products and thereby dangerous, even fatal to drink. How many of our progenitors died attempting to quench their thirst with water can never be known. Based on current worldwide crises of dysentery and infectious disease wrought by unclean water supplies, a safe bet is that a remarkably large portion of our ancestry succumbed to tainted water. So yeah, there was this lack of liquids that were safe for human consumption. And this also played a part in preventing things like long range ocean voyages. Like you couldn't just go far because you didn't have anything to drink to sustain you. And, lots of beers would spoil. They could only keep for a certain amount of time. And I never realized that the process of making beer actually purified the liquid and made it safer to drink than just your natural water. And like, what is the process of it that actually purifies it though? Because it's not distillation, because we don't have distillation yet back at this time.
I believe it would be, in this case, it is the formation of the alcohol acts as a sterilization agent.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this, but
that's okay. We can speculate wildly.
Yeah. Okay. When it comes to the naturally forming alcohol, it's because one of the things that's really interesting about fermentation is that, for instance, if you have, so like I said, it has to just be a solution of water and sugar, and that can be juice, or in the case of, I work for a company or a winery, I guess, that makes wine out of honey. So like you can make wine out of honey. It just has to have sugar. That's all that it needs. But at a certain point, the alcohol level in that solution gets to a point where it kills the yeasts. The yeasts proliferate until they eat all the sugar, or the alcohol gets so high that it kills them. And I think that's indicative of the fact that the alcohol itself prevents the growth of bacteria that are potentially like toxic or sickening.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next kind of date we have to kind of put a date on alcohol processes as they develop would have been like 7,000 to 6,600 BC in China. Because recently the residues of some sort of alcoholic beverage from this time period were recovered from this early pottery in a Neolithic village along the Yellow River Valley. And there were actually liquids more than 3,000 years old preserved inside this really tightly lidded bronze vessel. And researchers were able to chemically analyze them. And this would have been like dated back to the Shang and Western Zhao dynasties, at least, but they contained specialized rice and millet wines. And they had been flavored with herbs, flowers, tree resin, and would be similar to like an herbal wine that would have been described in the Shang dynasty. And this beverage currently predates the earliest evidence of grape wine from the Middle East by more than 500 years. So we know China was making these things earlier than the places in the Middle East were making grape wine, according to the records that we keep. But again, it's possible that everybody was just making this stuff super early. And this is just the order we found the evidence in, right? And this, was a mixture of rice, honey, and fruit in this wine that they found. And it's so wild that they were able to actually find it like sealed inside of these containers. Like the nerdy part of me is just like, can you imagine how exciting it would be to like go somewhere and be like, there's liquid in here. Like it's so old inside of these vessels. And then the next thing people kind of date, speaking of honey, happens around the same time, but it's more prevalent from 6,500 to 700 BC, and it is mead. And this is a really big full disclosure moment for me. I have no clue what mead is. And I know that I work in a meadery. It's a meadery. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And I feel like at this point, it's just been too late for me to admit that I have no clue what that means or what mead is. So this is a great opportunity for you to tell me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, this goes to, meadery with a D instead of a T. It's not meatery, like just in case I'm not pronouncing it clearly enough. Mead, MEAD, is just wine made from honey. And as you've pointed out, wine is just a category of beverage. Most people think of wine as being fermented grape juice, but wine is pretty much anything that goes through that process. You can have barley wine, you can have other kinds of wine. It's just that we mostly think of it as in Western society as wine made from grapes. Mead is wine made from a solution of honey and water. So Full disclosure, I do work for a winery that makes honey wine. So I guess I'm kind of plugging, but like I won't even say the name of it. Basically, uh, the idea is that you know how honey never goes bad. Like you can keep honey on a shelf and it just stays
Okay.
there. Honey doesn't rot. It doesn't ferment by itself. So
It
then
does get really hard and crystallized
it
sometimes. So what the
crystallizes.
fuck is
But
that?
right. And it's like, I'm sure eventually it becomes inedible, but honey has this incredibly long shelf life. You need to I believe it has to do with the pH. Um, uh, you need to dilute it to the point where yeasts can thrive in the environment. So if you dilute honey into basically it's like a simple syrup basically, but made from honey. Eventually you get to the point where these yeasts can survive and then they can start to eat the sugar and then it starts turning into alcohol. Like one of the jokes that I make is that at the bar that I work at, we have honey syrup, which is just a simple syrup, which is just water and honey dissolved together. So you can pour it into a drink to make something taste good. But if you dilute it too much, we have accidentally spontaneously made mead. Like it literally fermented in the bottle. Um, and it's really funny because behind us in the winery, they're actually making mead intentionally. And we were like, oh, we accidentally made mead. So yeah, mead is a kind of niche thing. And again, it's something that I believe, as we were talking about anthropology here. And so the question is not when alcohol was created, because it as I said, predated human civilization, but when it was intentionally created is important. And we can certainly say that any civilization that had access to honey would have accidentally created meat, because all it takes is you accidentally get water into a vessel that has honey in it, and as soon as it's able to ferment, you've got alcohol, and then
Did you
someone's going to
did
taste
you
it.
drink your DIY mead that you made out of the honey
Well,
simple syrup?
we tasted it. We poured it out because we were like, this is a mistake, but we were like, it doesn't. It was only on its way. It
It
takes a
was a crime
while.
against God and nature, what you made,
No, I mean it
and it
was. I
needed to be
mean
destroyed.
it was really tasty,
Really?
actually, but it was, yeah, but we were like not certain about its, potential. There can be potential other organisms that thrive in an environment. It specifically the alcohol was not high enough to have killed anything.
Okay, so forbidden mead.
Yeah,
You made
yeah,
forbidden mead. Okay,
yeah.
okay. So the wine that people usually think of, which is like grape wine, that one we have evidence from going to like 5400 BC in Iran, and that would have been something that lots of people like say is like, oh, that's like when wine was invented. But again, yeah, all these scholars are like, no, this stuff's just like been around as long as people have been around. And then the next interesting thing on the timeline is around 5000 BC is chicha. And I had never heard of chicha. Do you know what chicha is?
Is this the one with the spit?
Yes, it does have spit. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have evidence of this being made, 7,000 years ago. And it was considered like a staple in the diet of the Andes for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And there's a version of it called chicha de jora, which is a fermented
Uh-huh.
corn drink, which is really popular in lots of Latin American cultures. And it was probably the first known beer in the Americas.
Uh-huh.
And the people of Bolivia and South America drank it. And it was traditionally made by women. And it was made by chewing corn so that your saliva releases the sugars and that kickstarts the
Uh-huh.
fermentation. So it is made with spit. And the
Yep.
original stuff was kind of cloudy, yellowy orange, and it would have been mealy or gritty with a little foam. And this is interesting because when I read this, I was like, oh, these aren't like super commercial processes. A lot of these original drinks have a texture to them that's involved in the process.
How
And
is chicha spelt again?
CHICHA.
Oh, that's funny. For some reason I thought there was an X in there, but yeah, I like the one with the spit. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
wild, and there are still people who make it in the traditional way. And it's like, it's a delicacy.
it's
Yeah.
super interesting. Then around 3500 BC is when we start to see the first evidence of barley beer popping up in like a really consistent way throughout cultures. And this is probably, again, more of a testament to like our record keeping and what has survived history. But we know that beer would have been a key part of daily life for like ancient Sumerians and Babylonians and Egyptians. And we even know that as early as 1750 BC, there was a rule that pertained to bars. So we know that bars were around in ancient Babylonia because there was something called the Code of Hammurabi that said if you were a tavern and you diluted your beer, you could be sentenced to death. Do you know about this?
I can't wait to talk about bar rules when we get further on into bars, because bar rules have always been so wild. But yeah, the there is a version of that exists today in most states about it is illegal in some states to pour anything into a bottle of liquor. Like if
because
they
it's
catch you
considered like
doing,
fraud, right? Or like you're conning people.
because you could potentially be watering down your liquor. Yeah.
And then you get sentenced to death.
I had no idea that was in the Code of Hammurabi, which
Yeah.
has like about, like a million other things in it. Isn't it like
Yeah.
it was like an entire civilization? I failed history, but
Yeah, well, no, it is a part of that. And that is kind of how we have documentation that there were taverns around this time in ancient civilizations serving people booze. And when we think of beer, these would have been the beers that were a little closer to the stuff we drink today. Because they at this time roasted the grain to make dark beers. They made it in large breweries. They used barley. They used a lot of the common ingredients in modern beers. And also among the world's first known writing samples were clay tablets from this era that contained Sumerian cuneiform that had beer sales receipts and brewing instructions on them. There was even a poem that celebrated the Sumerian goddess of beer carved into one. And McGovern, that guy we talked about earlier, and organic chemist Rudolph H. Michel confirmed that the earliest chemical proof of barley beer dated back to 3500 or 3100 at the most recent BC. And that was in jars found in the Sumerian outpost of Godin Tepe, which would now be Iran also. And fermenting grain would have also just been a really practical way to preserve grain in between growing seasons for ancient civilizations. And then you would make it into beer, right? And the beer would be super nutrient dense. So it would have been something that like calorically and health wise would have been good for you when you were living in a community where you didn't have 24/7, 365 days a year access to all the crops that you needed, right? And so this would have been pre-globalization hacks, I like sometimes see these people who try to live off the land in the winter on TikTok, and it's just like a challenge for them. They do all this like planting and stuff, but they're always talking about how to like dry and preserve foods they grow or forage to make it through the winter. And this would have just been like one of those types of techniques. And brewers also would have been making low alcohol versions for children and just for everyday hydration. And also would have been like paying some laborers partially in beer because it was kind of, the alternative to water. So everybody needed access to it. And it also provided all these additional nutrients that people needed. There's also some evidence that says that the people who built the pyramids of Giza, the workers, got more than 10 pints of beer per day. But brewers also knew how to make, obviously, beer with higher alcohol content for special occasions and even for medicinal purposes. And in the Penn Museum's collection, there's a part of a priest's burial chamber covered in hieroglyphic instructions for living visitors that says something like, I just want as much beer and bread and meat as you can possibly bring for all of eternity. And this was kind of documented by Mark Van Horn, who's a PhD student and one of the writers of the Penn Museum's Ancient Alcohol Tour, which sounds interesting. So depictions of Sumerian beer drinkers also show people with reed straws sipping from communal knee-high pots. And Van Horn said that the beer that was made in those pots probably would have been, yes, chunky, with grain and soaked bread called bapir floating in it. And the straws would have been good for poking through that top chunky layer and then getting to just the liquid underneath. And this probably sounds not that appealing to a lot of people, I would guess, but I thought the chunky beer sounded more appealing than regular beer. And now I want the chunky forbidden Sumerian beer.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you talked earlier about like vessel, like the idea of there is in the service/bar industry, there is a fetishization of like really old shit that might kill you. And like if you found like a bottle of something that you're like, yo, like we don't know what's in this. It's so old that it could have just turned to vinegar, or it could be somehow poisonous, but like everyone wants to crack open that like urn or vessel from Sumeria or whatever that might have, as you say, the forbidden beer.
The forbidden chunky beer. I want it.
Yeah. One thing I did want to get. Oh no.
You say it.
No. I was only just going to say, as a tangent, the whole thing about fermentation and anthropology is that like it's always also been a preservative for food, and like that's like we'll get into that later. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So after this, we kind of travel along in time, and we're at like around 1000 BC to all the way up to 200 AD, and we have documentation of this thing called pulque, which was an Aztec fermented drink, which used the sap of the agave plant, right? So it was like a precursor to tequila. And this technique was probably not just used by the Aztecs. It was probably also used by the Olmecs, who were an even older civilization that was based in the lowlands of Mexico. But the agave liquid was really important in Aztec culture. There were two gods known for their relationship to it. And the first documentation of pulque was on stone walls, and this appeared around this time period. But obviously, it later would adapt into what we know today as tequila. Also around this time period, happening in a totally different part of the planet, was like Viking beer. This was like around 700 BC, maybe. And we know that the ancestors of modern Bavarians were brewing beer by the Bronze Age because there were traces of beer bread flavored with oak leaves, which would have been used as an ancient preservative, found in a crock that dates back to 700 BC around this area. So these kind of descendants of these people would transform the flavor and the smell of beer by starting to add in different preservatives that are super, super popular today, and kind of like how beer gets made today, which is hops. And I never knew what hops meant, and I was also ashamed to admit that to the world. So I looked it up, and people say that it's a relative of the cannabis plant. That's accurate, I guess.
Yeah, that's why a lot of IPAs kind of smell like weed.
I've never noticed that. I don't drink beer, so that's so interesting.
Yeah.
So Martin Zarnkaw, who's a master brewer, which apparently is a title that is very fancy, also a malter and a researcher at the Research Center of Weihenstephan for Brewing and Food Quality at the Technical University of Munich, says European hops originated in the Georgian region of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. And he does, yes, agree that it was probably Vikings who were the first to add hops to beer. And he says that there's evidence from relics found at these Viking settlements in northern Germany that show they used hops for something. And it would have just been rational that they would have used the hops to preserve the beer that they exported by sea from there. And we know that Benedictine monks in Germany, Belgium, and northeastern France were brewing with hops by, the 9th century. So that's a while after that. But we know that the first kind of prevalent uses of it would have been far before that. And the first written record of hops being used in beer would have been from a monastery in 822. So, that definitely wasn't the first time it was used. We got some time back, and it just kind of makes sense that it would have been the Vikings. Now we start to get to like 1200 BC going up to 476 AD, which would have like encompassed ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. And Greek writing, we know, doesn't talk about drinking water that much, right? There's some little exceptions. They talk about like mountain springs are safe to drink water from. Hippocrates specifically cited water from springs and deep wells as being okay, as well as rainwater collected in cisterns. So we kind of know from this that most people in this area also knew that the drinking water was otherwise pretty unsafe. So Scientific American kind of talked about this more, and they said the ancients, through must have been tragic experience, clearly understood that most of their water supply was unfit for human consumption. But this is, again, brings us back to that thing where beer and wine were free of pathogens and a lot safer to drink. So this is, yes, the antiseptic power of alcohol coming into play, as well as the natural acidity of wine and beer. And it also would kill lots of pathogens when the alcoholic drinks were diluted like with the bad water supply. It would still have enough power to kind of kill them and make them safe. And that's why people also started using alcohols around this time, and even before, honestly, in like folk remedies as like kind of a medicinal thing as well.
They would be antibacterial. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think maybe this is the time for me to go to what I was about to say earlier, which is just that. The thing about I didn't say it with enough force earlier, but the preservative qualities of alcohol are, as you said, there's the alcohol, and then there's the acidity, and that's really important. And that's why fermentation exists. Like sauerkraut is a way to take cabbage and ferment it so that you can can it or like put it on the shelf and it can survive through the winter. It's a way to take vegetables that you harvest during harvest season. You ferment them, and the acids produced by the yeast, because yeast either produce acid or alcohol, and both of those things are preservatives. So when you ferment a kimchi, for instance, that's why kimchi lasts a really long time. It doesn't go bad. It's already gone through a fermentation process. And so,
Right.
yeah,
It's like a preservative kind of element. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so we see all this happening like more in regards to the unfit water supply in Europe and the West, because in more ancient Asian cultures, they just boiled the water because they were making tea anyway. And that made the water safe to drink.
Oh, wow.
So Western cultures would have more beer and wine. And then Eastern cultures, they'd be like, well, we're just making tea. And that's how we're getting our hydration in a safe way. And so this means that it's quite possible that when you're talking about Western civilizations throughout history, that everyone was, just kind of drunk like all the time. Like people think that it's very, very possible that the default state in ancient times in the West was just mildly intoxicated constantly. And we also know that there were retail establishments serving alcohol back in ancient Greece, that men would go gather in the evenings for food and drinks and music or theatrical performances. And by ancient Roman times, taverns were popping up along roads and trade routes to kind of serve soldiers or travelers. And there were these ancient Greek public houses where councils would meet, and they even started to serve food and by default also beer and wine. And this made them akin to taverns or bars as well. But the interesting thing about ancient Rome is that if you were a man of social standing, you were not supposed to be seen in a tavern because it was considered, something like déclassé and tacky for the poors, right? So there was a special type of bar that existed around this time in ancient Rome that had locked doors, that was on quiet side streets, and men would wear veils to enter in the dark of night. And that's where they could do things like eat food or drink or gamble with relative privacy. So I thought that was really, really interesting, because I feel like similarly, if you were a really fancy rich man and somebody caught you going into like a really tacky dive bar today, people would look upon you the same way, right? It would symbolize some sort of like tackiness or debauchery. But yeah, it's also speculated throughout this time they were still using beer and wine to increase their nutritional intake of vitamins and minerals, to provide necessary micronutrients, to meet their caloric daily intakes, and also just to like distract from the boredom and mundanity of daily life. And also, this is a major thing, we were talking about the medicinal element, to operate as a pain management tool. It's kind of the only thing they had going on. And in the book of Proverbs, even, which was written somewhere between 970 to 697 BC, it says, give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto them that be heavy of hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. So we kind of know around this time, it was just like the psychological and emotional painkiller, and also the closest thing we had to a physical painkiller.
Well, right. If you don't have access to poppies, which is a whole other episode you could do.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, but that's your painkiller. So
Hippocrates' therapeutic systems also featured wine as a remedy for almost any acute or chronic ailment that would have been known in that time. And also the Alexandrian school of medicine would have used alcohol medicinally as well. Yeah, playing up on that. And traditionally, when it came to what you would just drink for like your day-to-day beverage, beer would have been more of like what common people drank, and wine would have been for the more affluent. But grape wine started to become really easily available to the average Roman citizen after, a century of vineyard expansion. And there was this like boom kind of in the wine industry that made it really, really affordable and accessible. So eventually that kind of distinction died down as well. And the common Roman was eventually also partaking in wine that was like virtually free. They were just like, we're making this stuff all day. You can get this so cheap. Eventually, though, Roman viticulture declined as the Roman Empire did. And the people who inherited it and kind of took it over and moved it into the future, it was the Catholic Church, because they were the only institution with enough resources to like maintain the production. So that kind of gets us to 500 to 1500 AD, which would have been like the Middle Ages in Europe. And this is where distillation comes in too. So we have this ancient Greek philosopher, right, who was describing the process of taking seawater and then distilling it to turn it into pure drinking water. What?
That was what I was going to bring in is desalinization that's one of the cores of distillation. Go on. It's
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So yeah, we had people getting into this process, and medieval civilizations were evolving their techniques, and they still weren't applying it to alcohol, though. So knowledge of distillation eventually spread to Europe along with the traveling Moors of kind of the early first millennia. And it was picked up by those who were practicing the Christian faith, right? They were using it to produce ingredients, though, for lots of ceremonies like medicines, too, colic and palsy and smallpox. And then after the Roman Empire declined and the Catholic Church took over operating the vineyards, they were making lots of money just making wine. So throughout the Middle Ages, grain kept being like this basic food of peasants, and beer was still their normal beverage, along with mead and homemade wines or ciders. And then you had the Catholic Church doing the major kind of wine production, you know. And there were some people, especially in the religious sects, who were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be drinking so much alcohol. It kind of says some things about this in the Bible, but it just didn't have very many other options, and it wasn't really practical to suggest anything else. So people were kind of like, oh, okay, everybody's drinking. But then distillation came along, and it kind of upped the seriousness, I guess, of the alcohol making process. So after 9,000 years of drinking relatively low alcohol content mead, beer, and wine, all of a sudden people started to apply distillation, and they started to get these high alcohol content spirits, right?
And you said you weren't entirely clear on the process of distillation.
Right. Can you explain it a little better?
Yes, I could. I don't think I explained it quite right, and I think I know what I left out, which is it's actually quite simple. You've seen condensation on a window, right? Like
yes,
when it's cold outside and the humidity of the air and a warmer inside has condensed upon the window. You've got droplets running down, right? It is just that process. The joke I make is that the cleanest water you can actually drink is like licking a window, because what has happened is heat has created vapor or steam, and that steam or vapor, especially in the process of distillation, you are literally boiling whatever you have initially. And desalinization is the perfect example. Seawater, like you said, you can make seawater drinkable because what you do is you boil the seawater, and then the steam runs through basically a pipe that has cold water around it so that it condenses again. The heat causes it to steam, and then the cold water causes it to condense, and then you get that distillate, what trickles off. And that is, all the impurities are left in where you're boiling it. So the salt is all in that vessel. And so in the case of an alcohol, say the chunky beer you were talking about, you can boil that, and you've got a little pipe that leads off of what you're boiling it in. And then that pipe has cold water running around it, and it causes the vapor from that to distill. And what you have there is just the alcohol. All the organic ingredients, everything else is still left in the place where you're boiling it, and you're just getting the steam. And
I think that makes sense. Yeah. So the steam is rising because it's hot, obviously. So it's been converted to steam. So it's separating from the tangible material, and then it's entering some sort of tube or vessel or whatever that extracts it from the original composition of what it was a part of. And then it cools as it does that to convert it back into liquid form.
And then you collect those little drops, and those drops that's the core. That's what liquor, that's what distilled spirits are. That's vodka, that's whiskey.
Okay, yeah, this makes sense to me, and that sounds really tedious. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it is a simple process, but it does take time. Yeah.
Yeah. So we think that distillation probably first appeared in Mesopotamia around 2000 BC, but just to make perfumes and aromatics. Yeah. But by around 780, alchemists, started to apply it to alcohol, but not for like drinking consumption, probably. And even though yeast produces alcohol, right, they can tolerate concentrations of only around 16%. So that was kind of the maximum proof for fermented beverages leading up to this. So yeah, that distillation process obviously was creating higher alcohol levels by the time we started to apply it to the alcohol process, and these drinks were getting a lot stronger. And by 1100 AD, distillation of wine to produce spirits started up in Europe in a major way. And this got to be really, really popular during the plague, which obviously, like Black Death, 1347 to 1351, right? It's not like you cured anything, but if you were dying, it could make you a little bit more comfortable. And doctors would even prescribe it just to like enhance people's moods. It treated everything from depression to later on, even in the Americas, cancer. So this was even more of something that we saw having like a medicinal element early on. We also had around this time ale houses getting really popular, which would have been run by women, and they would have been marked with a broom stuck above the door on the outside. And these were really popular in the Middle Ages. So we still had kind of our tavern and bar drinking culture. And the tavern like remained kind of the predecessor of what we think of as a modern restaurant. But they would have this daily meal served at a fixed time. And then there would just be alcohol that you could drink alternatively. And the world's oldest still operating kind of bar tavern as we think of it today actually started around this time in Europe. Do you know what it is, Tori? Have you heard of it?
The oldest bar in the world?
That's still operating. Obviously, it's debatable, but this is the one that gets the most credit for it.
Well, it's the one. See, that's the thing is, no one knows what the first. As with alcohol, no one knows what the first is, but the first one's still operating. I forget the name of it, but I have heard of it.
Okay, so it is Sean's Bar in Ireland, and it started around the year 900. It's really, really old. And every time they remodel it, apparently they find a bunch of old stuff in it. And they're like, what's this weird old money? And then somebody comes and dates it. And they're like, this place is really freaking old. So I thought that was really interesting. Also like around this. Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that would be a pilgrimage for a lot of bartenders.
Yeah, to Sean's Bar in Ireland. Yeah. So also around this time is when vodka started getting made. And it's interesting because when you were explaining the distillation process to me, the thing that came to mind is a TikTok I saw forever ago of like people making vodka out in the middle of a field. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was really visualizing the process you were explaining. Because I'm like, oh my God, I've seen a video of people doing this, but I like didn't understand what I was looking at. And this kind of blew my mind because if you'd asked me like, how long has vodka been around? I'd be like, forever. We were born with vodka. Vodka comes from the earth. It rains down on us from the clouds. But like, it didn't come around to the year 700. That seems way too recent. Way later than wine and beer and mead, obviously. It's thought to have originated in Russia and Poland. But I always thought vodka was made from potatoes, but you said it could be made from anything?
Well, okay. So to get into classifications of spirits, vodka is a neutral grain spirit, or it can be. Basically all alcohol is sugar that has been fermented, and that's alcohol. You get ethanol from that, and then you can distill it. And as you said, the reason the distillation didn't happen until much later is because it requires intentionality. It requires a boiling temperature. You have to be able to boil water to distill. And so that you can that's something that couldn't have occurred accidentally. And that's why it took so long anthropologically. But yeah, you can make vodka out of grains. There are different, this is more about national law, really. Like there's one thing I'm sure we are about to get into is the way that nations and legality regulates consumption and production of alcohol, which has always been crazy. Like you talked about the Hammurabi Code, like this is like, it goes way back. And so what one country considers vodka, another country might not consider as like acceptable vodka. Or, there might be rules in where it is made. The one example that everyone always talks about is Kentucky. Bourbon has to come from Kentucky, but there's like certain leeways in that. But champagne has to come from the Champagne region of France. People have really wildly strict rules. So, the short answer being, vodka can be made from potatoes, but it can also be made from other grains. There's vodka made from grapes. It's literally wine. It's literally wine that's been distilled. Um, if you have a base alcohol, vodka is like the most neutral of the spirits. The other ones, tequila, whiskey, rum, they have other requirements about provenance, where they come from, and process. But yeah, vodka's kind of the simplest.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Kentucky bourbon, because the next thing on our little timeline is whiskey. And it's the year 1000 to 1500 is kind of when whiskey started to get developed in a major way. And whiskey is obviously what I drink. I inherited that from my father. And my friend Baby Lungs always says that whiskey is a white people drink, so they are probably correct about this. This is the drink of the white people. And it did originate in either Ireland or Scotland. People aren't quite sure where, but it kind of happened when distillation made that migration from mainland Europe into Scotland and Ireland via traveling monks. All the religious people were the ones really doing the alcohol in a major way.
Monks love making alcohol.
Yeah, and the Scottish and the Irish monasteries would start to make this, and they called it aqua vitae, which means like water of life, right? Isn't that what that means? And ironically, the first written record of whiskey appears in the 1405 Irish kind of document, where it was written that the head of a clan died after taking an excessive amount of the aqua vitae. So not the water of life. The water of death is the first time we hear about this being documented. And it was at a Christmas party for the Lord. Yeah. And distilling of whiskey in Scotland, though, after this got underway in a major way, there was this like record called the Exchequer Rolls of 1494, where King James IV of Scotland granted a large amount of malt to Friar John Core by order of the king to make aqua vitae. So we've got all these written records popping up around here, and we know, like, okay, whiskey's like really part of the culture going on in this 500-year period. And yeah, by the early to mid 1500s, the production of whiskey was shifting away from the monasteries because King Henry VIII of England dissolved them, and it started to go more towards the general public. And then you had all these monks who are now independent. They don't have their monasteries anymore, and they're like, how do I make money? I don't know how to do anything. But they knew how to make whiskey. So they started being just private whiskey makers around this time. And I feel like I should really know what whiskey is made out of, but I do not. I have no idea what's it made out of.
So again, there's a long answer and a short answer, but basically, the thing that distinguishes whiskey is its mash, and that there are many different kinds of whiskey.
There's
and
bourbon, Scotch, rye, and Irish, right?
Yeah, and I am going to piss someone off because I'm going to try to condense this and I'm going to miss some details. So I apologize in advance. But the short version would be that whiskey is generally made from grains, corn, rye, barley, wheat, any number of grains. Those grains are malted, the process we talked about before, which involves germination and heating so that the sorghum is also one as well. Anyway, there's a million of them, but germination and then heating so that the starches are, the enzymes convert the starches into sugars that are available to the yeasts. The fermentation happens. You get basically, they literally call it barley wine. And then some places will sell that barley wine. And they're like, this is just really strong wine, quote unquote, made out of barley, and it's just we fermented it to a really high thing, and that could be beer. That's essentially, I'm not going to say that whiskey is distilled beer, but if you think about it as a chemical process, there is kind of a through line there. So yes, you get that mash, and then that liquid is then distilled, and then you get whiskey, and then we get into the final process that is involved in both wine and whiskey, which is aging. And aging is usually done in barrels, and it's where you take the raw distillate, which would be the whiskey in its current form. Sorry, this is actually going longer than I meant it to, but here's whiskey is not brown when it comes out of the still. The still being the device that is used to distill from the mash to the distillate. It's clear. All liquor is clear when it comes out. If you've ever had a liquor like rum, like a dark rum or a reposado tequila or a whiskey, the reason it is brown is that it has been aged in a barrel that imparted color to it. Or with really cheap stuff, sometimes they literally add color to it. And that's Jose Cuervo is the devil, and that's where we can get to that. But so yeah, when whiskey comes out, it is white, and it's called, the term is white dog. I don't know actually where that comes from, but people will sell that. It's moonshine. Like there's a strong tradition in America of creating like corn or barley whiskey that's just white and the strongest stuff you've ever had. You put it in a barrel, it ages, it mellows it out, and it also imparts that color to it. So yeah.
So is the aging process what changes whether it's bourbon, Scotch, rye, or Irish whiskey?
No, that's all about provenance and the mash that I described.
Oh,
So
okay.
like,
So then what's the difference you kind of touched on with Kentucky versus Tennessee when it comes to, because Tennessee is whiskey and Kentucky is bourbon? Is that accurate?
no,
No.
so there's whiskey and there's whiskey with no E, like WHISKY. And so Scotch is a whiskey and Irish whiskey is, I believe, with again, I'm probably would get into the weeds. The bottom line is that these are all about rules that are set up by mankind to decide what we call these things, and it's about what grains are used and where it comes from. That is, and the process. So there's like basically, for instance, and I do not know all the details, and I probably should, but for bourbon, the idea is that it's supposed to be a certain percentage of corn. It's supposed to come from Kentucky, and it has to be aged a certain number of years. Otherwise, you cannot call it bourbon. It's like, and
Okay, this makes
those
sense
are,
because I recently went to Kentucky and I stopped at this like place that was just like a really mediocre looking Italian restaurant inside of a strip mall that was decorated in the most unhinged way I've ever seen. And I went there because they had vegan pasta options, which was absolutely wild for the town I was in. It was a very small town and I didn't expect it. And I sat down and I noticed they had a full bar in this weird Italian restaurant that I was like the only person in. So I ordered a meal and then I was like, I'll get an old fashioned. And I was expecting like the worst drink of my life. Basically, I was expecting some sort of like below dive bar quality mix of alcohol. And they brought it out and it was like the best old fashioned I have ever had from this random like Kentucky spot. And I remember telling the waiter, I was like, this is surprisingly good. And he was like, you're not from here, are you? And I was like, no, I'm from California. And he was like, it's Kentucky. We take the bourbon very seriously here. And I was like, yeah, you really do. Like in a way I had not anticipated. It was really something special. So I believe that they have a lot of rules about how things go because everybody in that state knows how to make an old fashioned.
well, it's like a good example of also like, so for instance, Scotch, people are very precious about their Scotch. It has to come from the water from this particular valley, and it has to be done this particular way. And this is a 30-year-old Scotch. You always hear people talking about how old something is, because I mean that does make it precious in the sense that it is rare. But what's really funny is that in the last, it's been happening for a while, but there's Japanese whiskey that basically the Japanese sort of studied and replicated many of the processes that were involved in the making of Scotch. And they make stuff that is essentially Scotch, but they cannot call it Scotch because it's from Japan. But they do the same thing where they're like, this comes from this one river, which has a certain minerality. That water informs the ultimate taste of what you're drinking. And that's why it's so precious. And it's been aged in this kind of wood for this long. There's all this talk of you age in like Spanish oak or white pine. There's like every step along the way is what creates the ultimate like value of that. But like some would argue that there are many Japanese whiskeys that are actually Scotch and better than a lot of Scotches from Scotland. And I mean, that's subjective, but yeah.
Right. And I've noticed also there's been like an uptick in the prevalence of like a Japanese whiskey highball on people's cocktail menus. I feel like that's like a trendy thing for the past like 5 years. It's like everywhere you go, they got the Japanese whiskey highball. And that's not something I really saw, 10 years ago. You wouldn't go into a bar and see that on the menu as often.
Yeah.
And also, I've never heard of anybody below the age of 65 drinking scotch. I don't even know how you drink it. I've only heard in movies, like some boomer dude sit down somewhere and be like scotch on the rocks or something.
Well, it's funny because you actually might be the ideal Scotch drinker because you like it. I mean, I don't know. People are so precious about everything, but I know you like your whiskey, and there are some scotches that they make a good old fashioned.
Okay. Well, I also have another really old thing that's still in operation that you might know of today. It holds the title of the oldest licensed whiskey distillery in the world, founded in 1608, and it is the Old Bush Mills Distillery, licensed in Northern Ireland. Still around, 1608. It's like older than our fake country we live in. Yeah. Okay, so this kind of same time, there's some stuff happening in other places of the world and of alcohol also. So also in the 1400s, we have the distinction start to emerge in the beer world between lager versus ale. And this is another thing I've never understood when people are talking about all these different types of beers, what any of this means. But apparently for most of history, all beer was just ale because it was fermented at room temperature, primarily by a yeast that rose to the top. And Matthias Hutzler, who's a microbiologist and colleague of Zarnkaus, we talked about earlier, who studies brewing yeast history, says no yeasts were completely pure until 1883. And I didn't really know what that meant at all. Like, what's the difference between a pure or an impure yeast? Do you know, or is this like so in the weeds that we need a microbiologist?
I am a spirits guy. This is now.
This is beer world.
This is now someone else's job.
Right. Okay,
yeah, I make the cocktails, and I know a certain amount about wine. I do not know beer, unfortunately.
Okay,
I drink
well, me neither. Beer is an endless source of confusion for me in my life. But basically, by the end of the Middle Ages, we know that this mysterious hybrid type of yeast in Bavaria was doing something different than the other yeast people had been encountering. And instead of it rising to the top during this fermentation process, it sank to the bottom. And instead of fermenting in warm temperatures, it fermented in cool temperatures.
Okay.
And it did take weeks or months to kind of work instead of days, but it produced a lighter, milder tasting beer that was easy to drink, and it didn't spoil nearly as quickly as ale. And brewers called this style lager, from the German word meaning to store, because they could store it for a really long time. And it created now what's the world's most popular style of beer. And like ales, lagers can be light or dark depending on how the grain malt is roasted. And the early ones were thought to have had this like smoky, spicy flavor, which is really interesting to me, but not a lot of carbonation. And this special yeast that makes the lager was later dubbed S. pasteurianus for Louis Pasteur, right? Who in 1857 figured out how fermentation works. So by the middle of the 16th century, most taverns offered now a good dinner for 1 shilling or less with wine and ales as extra. As this was kind of all getting developed, everybody had been doing the ale thing. And then they're like, look, we got this new thing called lager. It's changing the world of beer. And taverns were blowing up. So these taverns in London, especially, were getting like really, really popular around this time. There was one called the Mermaid. There was one called the Boar's Head, which is pretty famous because Shakespeare's Sir John Falstaff, right, hung out there. He's like an actor. I don't know. I wasn't a theater kid. You might know. And then by the 1600s, England was so into these taverns that they started enacting laws making it illegal for a town to not have a tavern.
I don't know if you've ever, all delis, specifically in New York City, all bodegas, but a lot of delis have Boar's Head brand meat. Yes, that's where that comes from.
Whoa. Okay. Wow. I never made that connection. So while this was happening kind of in Europe, meanwhile, in the Americas, we've got tequila. tequila starting to develop around the same time. Like we talked about the chicha earlier, right? But tequila started to become like the next step in this process. And it came from Mexico and it was made from agave, right? And there's lots of theories about how it got its start, but the most popular story you're going to hear is that it ties back to the Spanish invasion. You'd have these parched Spaniards because they'd been without their brandy for too long. And this story made me realize I also don't know what brandy is. What is brandy?
Okay. Brandy. Brandy and cognac. So Hennessy, Cavassier. But
I've had that, but I don't know what it is.
Right. So let's see. All right, let's start from the beginning. Brandy is a distilled spirit from fruits. So you can have an apple brandy, you can have a grape brandy. So I am a little unclear on why I guess it must be oak aged. So, and yes, a grape brandy, for instance, would be different from a grape vodka because it must be aged. I'm going to say I'm in the weeds on this one. However, what I do know is that it is a spirit that is made from a fermented fruit, and then that is distilled and then aged, and that is brandy. So brandy is the precursor to cognac, and cognac comes from the cognac region in the same way that champagne comes from the Champagne region. So cognac is a brand, like it's a branding move. It's essentially bullshit. One of my favorite spirits in the world is a brandy that is distilled in California called Germain Raban. And famously, a very prestigious wine reviewer, said, there is no cognac better than the brandy from Germain Raban. Like,
wow.
this is again, and again, this is subjective, but it's important to note that, again, just because something has a label, just because something comes from a certain place, it's quite possible to make that something amazing with, like, people pay a lot of money to make something sound good. Alcohol and marketing have always been intertwined. It's people know certain brands. And
well, speaking of branding, I dislike this story about the Spanish and the tequila thing because I think that it is pro-colonizer branding, because these people are trying to attribute the creation of mezcal to the Spaniards. They're like, oh, they were so sad they didn't have brandy, so they improvised with mud and agave and made mezcal. And I was kind of like, that sounds too convenient, especially when people were basically making alcohol out of like agave already. And at the same time period, everybody was kind of distilling things. Like, I just don't understand why we would give the credit to the Spanish. That seems wild and probably not super realistic. But something else that came out of this was just interesting that made me realize I know nothing about alcohol is when I was reading this, the person writing this article about like this legend and the lore was like, well, you need to remember all tequilas are technically mezcals, but not all mezcals are tequilas.
This is my favorite trivia to blow people's mind.
What does this mean?
This is again, so it is important to make distinctions, but this is again kind of about branding, which is that mezcal is the broader category. And tequila is a kind of mezcal in the same way that not in the same way, but similar to the same way that champagne is a kind of wine and bourbon is a kind of whiskey.
Oh, tequila has to be from Tequila, Jalisco in Mexico?
Yeah, it has to be from a particular region, and it has to be made from a particular variety. I forget what the term is, but a certain kind of agave. And it
Blue
can only be made right. And there's like, I unfortunately am not a mezcal expert. The thing you will find is that people will get granular. People have been getting granular about alcohol for millennia.
Was that pun intended?
Yes, unfortunately.
Granular?
Yes, yeah. But yeah, it's people will dive deep on this stuff, and I will never know everything. But yeah, it's wild because people think of mezcal, it's like, oh, it's kind of like tequila. It's like this like weird smoky tequila. And it's like, actually, mezcal predates it, first of all. And second of all, tequila is just one kind of mezcal.
Yeah, super interesting. I had no idea.
But it became industrialized. Like the production of it became like heavily industrialized. And so far more of it was produced, and someone probably somewhere, and I'd love to know the story about how it got introduced and marketed to people in America. And that's why everyone in America knows tequila, and only in the last 20 years discovered mezcal.
Well, in the mid 1500s, I know you know that the Spanish government opened a trade route between Manila and Mexico. And in the early 1600s, the Marquis of Altamira built the first large scale distillery in what is now Tequila, Jalisco. And this is where it really started to take off. And then also there's some shit about the Cuervos. And you said the Cuervo thing's bad. And the only thing I could think of is the song that's like the Cuervo Gold by that guy who sings songs about dating 16-year-olds. But I can't remember his name, so none of this is helpful. Yacht Rock. He's a yacht rock man. The Cuervo Gold. Come on.
I don't know it.
He's beloved. He's a beloved white man who sings songs
Jimmy
about
Buffett?
dating children. Probably. Maybe.
Cuervo Gold song.
Yeah. It's like a yacht rock thing.
Wait. Hey 19 Steely Dan?
Steely Dan. Yeah, Steely Dan. It's
But
Steely
that's
Dan.
not a man. That's a band.
Oh.
I mean,
okay, well,
yeah.
I am not a fan. All right. I'm not a fan of Mr. Dan's work. First name Steely, last name Dan is definitely how I interpreted that information for years of my life.
Random trivia. The name of the band is actually quite funny because it is the name of a dildo. Steely Dan was a silver dildo, and they thought that was a fun thing to name their band after.
This sounds right for these men. So yeah. I only know about Cuervo from these men, plural men, multiple men, not one man named first name Steely, last name Dan, as I have now learned. The Cuervo family, right, also began commercially distilling tequila in 1758. And that also kind of bumped up the notoriety and the kind of distribution of tequila in the Americas. And then also we have the Souza family in 1873 who did it kind of the next major way that we think about. And people tend to think that Don Zenobia Souza was the one who was responsible for identifying blue agave as being the best for producing tequila. But, you know, again, this is just lore and legend at this point. And it wasn't until 1650 that another alcohol development was made, gin. And this is when I realized I got no clue what that's made out of either. And so I looked it up and they said juniper berries. It's a berry. Gin's a berry. Gin's a fruit.
So I'm gonna get some of the things wrong, but the important thing to note about gin is that this is really reductive and entirely wrong, but a good way to think about it is that it is infused vodka. Gin has, yes, and that's not entirely true, but gin is an unaged gin and vodka. The reason they're both clear is because they don't spend time in any barrels. We talked about that.
Yes.
So gin,
the barrels give them color.
The barrels give whiskey and dark rum and reposado tequila.
Mezcal.
Mezcal is usually there are aged mezcals.
Okay.
Absolutely, but I think currently most mezcal is unaged.
Okay.
Yeah. If it's if it's clear, it's not aged. If it has any color to it, it's been aged. Or really quick, going back to the Cuervos, the reason Cuervo Gold is because they add caramel coloring to it. It is not aged.
It's a lie.
It might be slightly aged, but it's they hasten
the Cuervo Gold's a lie.
Yeah. And also,
wow, does Steely Dan know?
I don't know. And also, I believe that at one point Cuervo Gold was aged and now it's not. And also there could, again, this is all apocrypha, people talk shit, but certainly Cuervo, because they just ramped up their production because they became the most popular tequila in America and probably abroad, you have to keep up with production. And if something has to age in a barrel for 2 years, you can't, or longer, 10 years, you can't keep up with it. Anyway, so gin is unaged. most, well, okay. Oof. M- Most this is the thing. Most gin that people think of as gin today is unaged, because it's clear, and then either it is infused with and distilled from botanicals, and that's botanicals include juniper berries. But as I understand it, what defines what's allowed to be gin depends on where it's legally produced and where it's legally sold. So, like, some things could be gin in certain countries or regions, and not considered gin in other places. But there are gins now that have, or not now, but there all have been gins that could have lemongrass and basil and any botanical element. It's herbs is the bottom line. So herbal vodka is unfortunately like a really shitty way to describe it, but it's how I'd say. And that's why
And
gin is
lots
so
of people
special.
hate gin. Gin is a very divisive liquor.
Yes, and that is because gin used to only be one thing, and now, thankfully, due to the gin renaissance of the like early 2000s, there are like amazing gins out there. Gin.
I was once sent an entire PR package by Hendrick's Gin. So I'm quite partial to them now because they gave me free alcohol. And then it started this massive thing on the internet where everybody was like, Madeline's a sellout. She's a capitalist shill for drinking the gin. And then all these other socialists were like, my guy, if drinking free gin isn't praxis, what is? Like, drink the free booze, take it from the companies. It was a wild episode. So I'm a fan of gin. I like gin, but yeah, lots of people are like, never again. And then there's that myth about the hangovers. Everybody's like, the hangovers from gin, though. And I am a little bit guilty of the hangover myths. I have a thing that I know is not physically possible and makes no sense. But also for me, the only times I've ever had a hangover has been when I have mixed alcohols. And that doesn't make sense because cocktails have mixed alcohols all the time, right? But I think we all have our little things in our brain where we're like, that one just works for my head, even if it's not founded in reality. So I think a lot of people are like, never gin, because in my head it gives me a hangover.
Well, we've had this conversation, I believe, and would I derail you if I gave you my opinion on the idea
Give
of
me
what
your
kind of booze?
opinion on the hangover and the mixed alcohols, because I know it's not rational.
Well, no, here's the deal. I used to be firmly in the camp of you're full of shit. No matter if you didn't get a hangover because you drank one particular thing, you got a hangover because you drank too much, you fucking idiot. Like, I mean, that's like, like you just drank too much and you didn't eat enough or whatever, and now you have mild alcohol poisoning. But I did discover later on that there is something to the difference between these alcohols, and that is, I believe they're called esters. And so we talked about distillation, right? You take the steam comes out of whatever the source fermentation is, and it's distilled into this liquid that is ostensibly pure. It's why alcohol doesn't go bad. You can store it on the shelf. It doesn't have any of the organic compounds that might rot or ferment or whatever. It's already fermented. It's this pure it's ethanol that's somewhat diluted maybe by water, but it's shelf stable. However, there are still traces of what produced it, and those things can affect you. What grain was it made from? What is the organic origin of it? And then with gin, for instance, what are the botanicals, excuse me, is the term, the herbs and stuff that are infused into it or that it's distilled from, like, those will have some chemical effect on the way that it makes you feel. It's the ethanol is the active ingredient, but you're still consuming the other things. And those things can affect the way that, like, interact with they can affect the way your brain reacts to the ethanol. And so I actually do believe that it's not entirely bullshit if people have sensitivities to certain, like, booze.
Yeah, well, kind of going along with this whole idea of the tummy hurt, ow, ow. One of the most ironic things to me is that gin was actually developed by a doctor, Dr. Silvius from Holland, and it was originally created, are you ready for the big reveal? To be a medicine for kidney disorders. Which is wild, because alcohol gives you kidney disorders, right? That's what it does. Kidney and liver messes with all your clean out bits in there. Okay.
Kills the organs.
Kills the organs real good. Yeah. So around the same time as we got Dr. Silvius in Holland making gin, something else is getting made in a different part of the world. We're creeping up to current times. It is the 1600s, and it is rum. I had no idea rum was so recent, and it's made from molasses, sugar cane, and it originated in the Caribbean. And right when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it is politically steeped in violent colonization and slavery of all the people working on the sugar plantations. I didn't know this. I didn't know it's like the blood diamond of alcohol. It's blood liquor. And there's this book called Rum Curious, the indispensable tasting guide of the world's spirit. This writer, Fred Minnick, says explicitly, yeah, slaves planted the sugar cane, fertilized it, cut stalks, and transported it to a mill where the cane was crushed and juice extracted. They strained the juice and placed it in a boiling pot until the sugar was crystallized. Slaves also seined the boiling water to collect the molasses, the syrupy byproduct from making sugar. And enslaved people might have even been the ones who created the rum making process that the white capitalist plantation owners profited from, because molasses was sold and used as a sweetener, right? But the fermented molasses was something that poor white people and, yes, enslaved Black people in the Caribbean enjoyed. And at some point, somebody just distilled the fermented molasses and rum was born. And also, once I learned this, I was like, oh my God, there's so much crossover with the appropriative and often racist tiki bar thing. Everything surrounding rum is just steeped in the worst type of racism you can imagine, right? Because the tiki bar thing, that was developed by two white guys from California, Don Beach and Trader Vic. And you always see those Trader Vic's places. And I had no idea it was the tiki bar guy. And they combined, obviously, the Caribbean rum along with Asian food and Pacific Island iconography to create this like fake quote unquote tropical paradise. It's just like a cultural appropriation amalgamation nightmare. And they called it tiki bar, right? Peak exoticization. So the guy, Don Beach, is what he goes by. That's his little nickname. But his real name's Ernest Gant with two T's. Too many T's in that name. And he first opened this place called Dawn the Beachcomber in Southern California in 1933 that became known for rum rhapsodies, which were like the first quote unquote tiki drinks. And they were these elaborate theatrical things with fresh juice and house-made syrups. And they could have like 10 ingredients in them. These things were wild. And this part gets really bad. Don had 4 Filipino bartenders that he called the 4 boys who made all the drinks behind the scenes. So he was like exploiting the Asian labor, exoticizing them, you know, put them on display like kind of Harajuku girl style with Gwen Stefani. Just like, look at these Asian people I'm using as props. Ooh. And then Victor Bergeron, who was inspired by his visits to Don the Beachcomber, opened his own tiki restaurant in Northern California in 1937 that even had a gift shop and had like shipwreck decor. And then he offered guests free food and drink in exchange for decorative items. And that's what earned him the nickname Trader Vic's. And that's where Trader Vic came from. And both of these restaurants served Chinese food because it was considered exotic to the American palate, but still identifiable. And these all became chains. There were 25 Trader Vic's in the world by the 1960s and 16 Dawn the Beachcombers. And after World War II, tiki took off and it kind of just like joined this weird trend of themed restaurants that was huge in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And yeah, it was just this really weird, creepy thing the white people were up to. Serve people. This is what our people did to the world. We brought tiki culture to the world, and we need to be held accountable for it.
Well, I will say this is you are the history of tiki is incredibly fraught. However, it is absolutely fraught and weird, and there's so much racist stuff and appropriation and everything. However, there's someone who is very near and dear to my heart named Shannon Mustipher, Mustipher, and she wrote a book called Tiki, Modern Tropical Cocktails. And she is a Black woman with, I believe, Caribbean roots. Um, and when the book came out yeah, it was like a few years ago. But when it came out, it was the first cocktail book written by a Black author in more than a century.
Whoa.
And she does, I mean, her work is she's a mentor to me. She is one of the best bartenders I've ever met, and she taught me everything I know about rum, which unfortunately rum is one of those things where I kind of defer to other people because it's another one of those spirits that people get really, really into. But I can highly recommend this book. It's just called Tiki Modern Tropical Cocktails. And it is fantastic. And I believe that she does get into a little bit of that.
The politics of tiki.
Oh yeah, and there is living in Bed-Stuy near Crown Heights, which is the neighborhood south of me, is extremely. It's populated by a lot of Caribbean and West Indian people, and there is a lot of pride attached to certain aspects of rum and rum development, even if there was like I guess it could be considered kind of a retaking of that.
Well,
And so
especially if it was the Caribbean enslaved people who originally developed rum, which it sounds like they were.
Yeah.
And then these white guys just did something weird and racist to like 3 different groups of people at once. They were like, we're doing a racist to the Caribbeans. We're doing a racist to anybody from Asia, really. Just if you're from Asia, you're getting thrown in there in some capacity. So
and as we may get into, there is a thing about laws and production of alcohol that have always been used to disenfranchise people. And this is one of those examples. Thankfully, now there's like companies that are like, this is a like Black owned rum distillery. This is like, these people like have like this heritage and they are like, taking it back, or like it's there is a lot of cool stuff happening. And for instance, there is a company that makes rum that was unfortunately named Plantation. And they were like, everyone was like, yo, what the fuck, you called your rum company Plantation? And they have changed their name since, so there's like, there's a little bit of
progress.
Attempt. Yeah, that sounds progress.
I do like the idea of Caribbean culture reclaiming rum, or not even reclaiming because it was theirs all along, like rising to prominence over like the weird white people exoticization thing, because I really do enjoy a silly rum drink. And I was very sad to learn it is the most racist alcohol in its current implementation in alcohol culture in the United States, at least.
Well, as I said, I would definitely I would just point everyone to that book, and also Shannon Mustafer's like broader work as like educating people about the history, and it is incredibly well researched. She's a master. So yeah,
I love that. Something else I did love about rum is that Fidel Castro confiscated Cuba's rum distilleries in 1960 from Bacardi. It was like, buy Bacardi, because the whole thing about Castro was like, why do we have all these, Western white-owned companies in here basically enslaving us and making us work for them? Like, no, Cuba owns this rum distillery now. And then Bacardi was just like, whatever, we're just going to go to Puerto Rico, Mexico, Brazil, the Bahamas, and try to exploit people there, and in the Canary Islands. So there's all these interesting politics around rum. And in 2008, the US government subsidized the world's largest spirits company, which is called Diageo. Diageo. Have you heard of this? It's probably like one of those parent companies that owns like a million smaller companies, to open the Captain Morgan distillery on the United States Virgin Islands, which that's a colony. That's a colony for sure. So Diageo will receive nearly $3 billion over 30 years, including a $165 million distillery and payments to keep the cost of molasses low, for opening this in the US colony on the Virgin Islands, basically. So yeah, there's a lot of capitalized colonizer business wrapped up in rum. It's the most politically complicated alcohol, I think. So I'm glad that you shared the positive light in the world of rum. What's happening?
Right. And that's the thing, is that there has, in the same way that there was a gin renaissance, there was kind of a rum renaissance where people came around to rum. Unfortunately, yeah, it rum itself is an incredibly new, the means of production. There's like so many different things about like the aging process and the provenance of the sugar cane. And there's this thing that, oh God, I'm gonna forget the name of it. I believe it's called a solera, where they age the rum in barrels, but it's poured through the barrels so that it kind of cascades. And so you have these blends of different ages of rum, and those rums all contain the characteristics of the terroir. It's like, it's a beautiful spirit that unfortunately has this like incredibly difficult history. And but there's still like good stuff being done now. And it's like, I think it is very, I mean, whatever, no uh, ethical consumption, etc. But
Yeah.
there are cool people doing cool shit with rum, and all you got to do is order the right one.
Yeah. Well, okay. So all this talk about the colonies in the US Virgin Islands and the Americans, I was like, all right, the next thing we got to talk about when it comes to alcohol is like the history of booze in the USA specifically. Like, we're American. This is where we are. This is the lens through which most of our relationship with alcohol can be viewed. And the rum thing is happening, obviously, right around the 1600s. And this is the same time that the Americas are being actively colonized. It's a story of the colonization of the Americas with the rum plantations. And meanwhile, here in the United States, our area of the Americas is getting colonized too. So when we talk about like alcohol in the United States, there's this whole period from 1615 through 1783, which is like the American colonies period in the USA. And this is also like ties into all this in a really interesting way. And so by the 1600s, we got all these types of alcohol floating around the new colonies and what's now the USA. Water's still not super sanitary. Beer and wine still considered much cleaner, much easier to access. And during the 150 years kind of before the American Revolution, the colonists of North America, for them, drinking a bunch of alcohol was just considered really normal. Like the beer with the meals, that was for everybody. Kids were having beer with their meals. Everyone kind of that same idea about like, hey, was everybody's default in Western Europe in ancient times just kind of drunk? Okay, if we're looking at the American colonies, the answer is, yeah, everybody here is default just kind of drunk, like all the time, which I feel like if you really look at how our country was founded and the Constitution, that makes a lot of sense, because you got to be like super racist and then like pretty drunk to be like, what do we do with all of the people of color we've enslaved? And just some white guys like, we'll just make them 3/5 of a person. Like, this is some real bad, stupid, racist, drunk man logic. It's just all the bad things at once. So everybody's trashed in the colonies. Nobody is rational. Everybody's mess. And Frank Clark, who is the master of historic foodways at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, was just like, yeah, beer was the liquid bread for the early American colonists. So we definitely know the alcohol and the American history is inexplicably linked. So when the Puritan settlers came from England to the New World in the early 1600s, we know, for example, that the Mayflower had more beer than drinking water on it. That's just what they brought. They're like, bring over the beer. We know genocidal douchebag Christopher Columbus made his big voyage just with like a fuck ton of wine on board. And we know that a really early order of business for, all the Europeans doing their colonizing here was to try to lure brewmasters to come move to the colonies. So we were trying to like get them to come over so they could make it here, so everybody had a source of liquid that they could consume that was sanitary.
But
So
also
then,
a source of alcohol. I mean, just people have always longed for it. That's wild. I never thought about that. They just, wow. They
yeah,
just,
yeah, there's like,
we need
we need
booze.
it. So you got to come here. Yeah, yeah. And then in the mid 1600s, this is when rum starts to get imported, and it's closer, obviously, because it's in a different colonized part of the Americas. And it became super popular. Like, American colonists during this time were obsessed with rum. They were consuming nearly 4 gallons a year per person, like just drinking this nonstop. When George Washington was running for the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, He bribed voters by giving them 28 gallons of rum and 50 gallons of rum punch. And in 1764, the British ended up passing the Sugar Act of 1764, which forbade the colonists from importing rum. And there were all these massive protests, like boats were impounded for harboring smuggled molasses and rum, and the colonists were fighting back to get the boats out. It was this huge fight. And in 1771, the Portsmouth Molasses Party boarded the ship called Resolution to save 100 hogsheads of smuggled molasses. And this was like this huge act of rebellion that potentially even inspired the Boston Tea Party 2 years later.
I was about to say, is where you're going that like the need for rum was like integral to the American Revolution?
Oh, definitely. 100. I'm telling you, these people, real drunk, bad ethics, not sure what's going on, really violent. This is what we know about. I feel safe saying this. This was my family. My people were here during this time. And, you know, I always say it's wild that my family was here so long. We never managed to amass wealth. I think it's because we were the drunk ones on the boat going like, yes, this makes sense with everything I know about my family. This checks out. We were the family of alcoholics, less concerned with amassing wealth and financial stability in the colonies. We just wanted to get drunk, and it was not. It was not great.
Respect that a little more, honestly.
I mean, it's all bad. It's all bad.
No. It's just like it's slightly like if all you're looking for is like hedonism, like I'd rather that be the inspiration for, murdering a bazillion people.
No, it's horrible. It's awful. Every way you look at it, bad, 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 bad. So, yeah, this happens, and then around 1765, Americans are just like, fuck it, we'll distill our own rum. So they distill nearly 5 million gallons of rum along the East Coast. And that makes it more available than whiskey in major cities. Like you're in Boston, it's easier to get rum now than it is to get whiskey because they got it right there. And this kind of was happening in these taverns that had popped up in the United States, because taverns had popped up in the colonies of North America pretty much as soon as Dutch settlers first arrived. Like Boston's first tavern was called Cole's, and it opened its doors in 1634. New York's first tavern was also opened around then in Dutch.
I think I know this one. Is it the White Horse?
I don't know the name of it. No. I don't know the name, but it was opened by the governor, Governor Kieft, who was just like, I'm tired of having all these strangers in my house that I have to entertain. So I just opened a tavern to lodge them and feed them and give them alcohol. And colonial courts generally required that some kind of public house be established in each community, similar to those laws that existed in England, where they're like, hey, you get a town, you got to put a bar in there. And that's kind of what was happening in North America when the colonists were there. And these early American taverns were all, because of that, under strict guardianship of the government, which also regulated the prices. So these early American taverns popping up everywhere, right? And we know, like, from the myth of America, it's just like all these like weird bullshit myths we're told to try to like glamorize it and like minimize the violence or whatever, and be like, oh, the triumph of the American spirit, blah, blah, blah. It's just a mess, though. But we know we've got Paul Aaron of Brandeis University and David Musto of Yale, who review the historical research on drinking in America and alcohol and public policy beyond the shadow of prohibition. And they say the colonists brought with them from Europe a high regard for alcoholic beverages. Distilled and fermented liquors were considered important and invigorating foods whose restorative powers were a natural blessing. People in all regions and of all classes drank heavily. Wine and sugar were consumed at breakfast. At 11 and at 4, workers broke for their bitters, cider and beer, were drunk at lunch, and toddies for supper and during the evening. So taxes on alcohol were therefore a huge source of revenue for these colonial governments. And the alcohol was just flowing just everywhere. They were drinking at the barn raisings. They were drinking at the fairs. They were drinking during military activity, which just reminds me of how we saw that place where there was axe throwing, but they serve you alcohol. So like get drunk and brandish a weapon. It sounds like a great idea. That's what we were doing back then. We were getting weird military super trashed with weapons.
There's this whole thing about, there's this whole thing about British sailors that were allowed, I think it's British sailors that were allowed a ration of rum. Like you gotta let you're sending people to go do horrific things around the world and basically terrify innocent people. they got to be drunk for it, and you were allowed like it was called a tot, I believe, and it was
That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Because
it
you
was
got
like
it. It's
every
kind of like later on how all the soldiers had to be on amphetamines to commit all the war crimes that the capitalist
yep,
overlords, imperialists wanted them to commit in their name. And they're like, I'm
yeah,
going to need to be on a lot of drugs for this. Yeah. It's really, really wild. It's just like when you think about the whole history of like militarization in general and imperialism, I mean, it's just such a dark, twisted thing for so many reasons, you know? And this was even happening during this time, you know? So there's like this kind of equivalent going on also while this is happening in the Americas, like in 1777. This was in Prussia, which isn't really relevant to the direction we're going for the rest of the episode, but I just thought it was like a really interesting quote. So Frederick the Great, he had this economic strategy and he was like, and militaristic strategy that kind of like relied on alcohol. And around the same time, coffee was getting really popular in Prussia, and he was so mad. So he said, it is disgusting to notice the increase in the quantity of coffee used by my subjects and the amount of money that goes out of the country as a consequence. Everybody is using coffee. This must be prevented. His Majesty was brought up on beer, and so were both his ancestors and officers. Many battles have been fought and won by soldiers nourished on beer, and the king does not believe that coffee-drinking soldiers can be relied upon to endure hardships in case of another war. So he was losing it. He's like, give the soldiers beer. Ah. And it was so prominent, this whole like give everybody alcohol for everything, that whiskey was even used as currency during the American Revolutionary War. And also during the American Revolutionary War, these taverns that popped up were the main place that political planning sessions happened. And this is when you hear people say like, oh, the concept for a new country for the United States of America was conceived in these taverns during the American Revolution. It's like literally our country's playbook was written on like a bar beer napkin, like a beer stained napkin at a bar. Is these guys were drunk, just like, I got an idea, just coming up with the most ass plan I've ever heard in my life. So all this is super like integrated, obviously, into our consumption of alcohol. And
I mean,
there was
it's,
this
I was
idea
gonna
at
say
this
it's
time.
like
Huh.
sorry.
No, you go.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say it's like the Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, hey, they made some great films, but they did it while they were like completely fucked up. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah. I mean,
Fiona
I don't.
Apple couple.
Oh, the Fiona Apple conversation. Yeah. I mean, that is funny. You told me this story and I love it. Is that Fiona Apple decided to stop doing drugs because one night she was trapped in a house listening to Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino high as shit on cocaine talking to each other. And she's like, this is humiliating and I never want to embarrass myself like this. So I will not be doing drugs anymore. Yeah. I feel like if you were in the tavern where all of our drunk, quote unquote, founding fathers were like, I got an idea for a country, you'd be like, this is so fucking embarrassing. I'm literally never drinking again because I don't want to be these guys. Yeah. And there was some pushback at this time. It's funny you said that then, because I was going to say that there was pushback and some people were like, hey, drinking is not so good for us. But nobody was like, this seems systemic in some capacity. No. This is like in true, what would eventually become the American way. The people who thought this way were like, this seems like a personal failing because you're all losers. That was the interpretation. And that's kind of honestly been our public policy for how we address issues in the United States since then. It's like, oh, something's wrong. It's because you're a loser. Have you considered that? So the people who were mad at like this drunkenness everywhere, widespread, they were like, this is a sin against the natural order. So according to Aaron and Musto, those people we were talking about earlier, they said drunkenness was condemned and punished, but only as an abuse of a God-given gift. Drink itself was not looked upon as culpable, any more than food deserved the blame for the sin of gluttony. Excess was a personal indiscretion. So this just really hammered that idea of American personal accountability in. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, the 1707 to 1725 Acts of Union merged England and Scotland and increased taxes dramatically in this process. And this included the English malt tax of 1725, which led lots of Scottish whiskey makers to go underground and produce at night to commit tax evasion. And that is why that form of whiskey they made was called moonshine. And the phrase just kind of migrated to the United States and we started using it there too. So by 1783, the American Revolution was coming to a close. The first commercial whiskey distillery was founded in Louisville, Kentucky, on the banks of the Ohio River by Evan Williams. So we've got the American Revolution. It happens. We're not with Papa England anymore, right? We're our own little thing. We're our own little fucked up child of England doing equally bad things. And by this point, American adults from 1784 to say 1920, we're looking at, a little over, it's like a century and a half here, they were consuming 6 to 7 gallons of pure alcohol per average adult every single year. It was like a lot of alcohol people were drinking. And this is when people were like, maybe it's addictive. This is when everybody was like, there's something going on here. So now there was a shift in how we were perceiving drunkenness. People were like, well, maybe you're like the victim of this substance that's actually doing this to you. But people went really, really far with this too in the opposite direction. They're like, oh my God, alcohol makes normal people violent degenerates. And this suddenly became responsible for this whole idea of the breakdown of the family, weakening the social order. All of a sudden, even casual drinkers were like, I could go off the deep end into an addiction spiral at any moment just from having one little sip of alcohol. And this like moral panic started to develop about alcohol in general. And in 1791, a new tax was introduced. And now at this time, import duties were already pretty high. So this was a tax on domestically produced distilled spirits. And it was the first of its kind by this new government. And it did apply to distilled spirits of any kind, but whiskey was the most popular thing going on during this time. So this tax became commonly known as the whiskey tax. And the farmers hated it. So from 1791 to 1794, the farmers were rebelling against the new US government's tax with the Whiskey Rebellion, which was famous. And the rebellion finally came to a turning point in July of 1794 when the home of Tax Inspector General John Neville was attacked by 600 armed men. And then President Washington responded by sending in a militia force of 13,000 people, which is like, oh, wow, okay, that's a lot more than 600, to just march west and just kill anybody they encountered. And the rebels disbanded for their arrival. It's like you hear 13,000 people are coming to just kill you, and they've been killing people the whole way, just like, like traipsing west towards you. Yeah, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I actually don't care that much about the tax. And this mass protesting came to an end. But all of this in the climate was leading up to a lot of people being like, I don't think that we should be messing with alcohol at all. So in the 1800s and through the early 1900s, all these temperance societies started being formed.
Here we go. This is my favorite part.
I know, you love this stuff. You love this stuff. So this is mostly middle-class people doing this, by the way. And they are renouncing liquor with evangelical fervor. And in the 1830s, these temperance societies grew so rapidly that they prompted Alexis de Tocqueville's observation that America was a nation of joiners. We were the lemmings. We were jumping off the cliff, right? By 1835, 1.5 million Americans vowed to never touch alcohol again. And there was only like 13 million Americans around for reference. So this is like more than 10% of the population. Also, weirdly, Johnny Walker himself, he was a teetotaler around this time. No alcohol consumption, but he did make his own whiskey, which would ultimately become one of the most like widely distributed brands of whiskey in the world.
Yeah.
But whatever, all this is going on, and these sober temperance societies were starting to get political. They were getting big, they were getting powerful, they were getting political. And by 1916, 23 states had passed, maybe by referendum, prohibitionist laws of various kinds. And that gets us 1920 to 1933,
Here we
famous,
go.
the Prohibition. The Prohibition.
Volstead Act, baby.
So prior to Prohibition, Americans had actually cut their drinking down quite a bit, right? These temperance things were growing. It was just there was more taxes on the whiskey. So instead of, doing the 6 to 7 gallons a year of pure alcohol per person, it went down around 2 to 3 gallons of pure alcohol per year, which was like a third to 1/2 of what it had been. But people were so whipped up in a frenzy over the danger of alcohol that it didn't really matter. The people were so mad at this, they wanted to get it down to 0. So the Anti-Saloon League was founded, and that was a political group that had been campaigning for years on the single issue of making alcohol illegal in the United States. And they drafted a potential amendment to the Constitution to do just this in 1917. And finally, in 1919, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, and it officially brought about prohibition. So all the prohibition kind of trivia, I think, Tori, right? So what did prohibition actually prohibit?
Well, yeah, I mean, this, like I said, I was waiting for you to drop the bomb because this is, of course, like, it's a huge dividing line. And it's like, I mean, there's a reason that there's like a brewery named the 18th Amendment. And it's like, there's a million bars called Prohibition. It's just the history of alcohol was kind of uh, like Phoenix, died and reborn under these circumstances. But yeah, it's just prohibition. It prohibited its production, transport, and sale, which are important distinctions. Production, transport, and sale of alcohol, not the consumption. It was not illegal to drink alcohol. It was only illegal to produce, transport, and sell it. And we went to that not silly. It was a lot of fun.
Silly. It's a Fresno
silly, but it's
speakeasy with
great.
our
It was great.
friends. Yeah.
There was a speakeasy in Fresno, and the guy who was very charismatic gave us this hilarious spiel about all the loopholes, and that's like the best part. So it was the 18th Amendment. I think it's called the Volstead Act, but maybe that's a separate law. But
that's a related thing that has to do with the amendment. That's about the enforcement of the amendment. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like a lot of people might know of this mostly from the show Boardwalk Empire, because that like chronicles this exact time.
You were one of 12 people living today who has seen Boardwalk Empire.
Excuse me, it's an extremely popular HBO Max show.
It's Max now. It's Max now. Yeah,
whatever.
Bad, yeah.
It stars Steve Buscemi, and he's great. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
But yeah, it's it's just it was all about loopholes. It was all about going around people still wanted to consume alcohol, and they found ways to do so. You'd get a prescription for alcohol. You could bottle perfume that was actually alcohol, and everyone was like, oh, it's perfume, because you remember earlier you were talking about how distillation was used in the production of perfume. Turns out you could make something that was labeled perfume and it was actually at least semi-potable, like something you could drink and it would fuck you up. It probably would kill you eventually, but so does most alcohol. So people they would do anything, and that's like, I assume I'm going to let you go.
No, this is totally right. So you were correct that Prohibition did just prohibit the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages, but it did not prohibit the possession, consumption, or home brewing of alcoholic beverages. And the 18th Amendment read, after 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subjected to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. So there was this 1 year timeline from the date they passed it where they're like, okay, you got a year to get all your shit together and shut it down. And the Anti-Saloon League really didn't think that it was a big deal that this just prohibited the manufacture, transportation, and sale. They were like, oh, who cares if you can still possess it, consume it, and brew it at home? Because they thought that once like taverns and bars and saloons and other drinking facilities were gone, people would just kind of get over alcohol and it would just die out. They didn't realize we've been doing this as long as people have existed. So they didn't get that. So this amendment, gave people a year to dispose of their existing stocks, shut it all down. And in the meantime, the Anti-Saloon League helped Congress write legislation to enforce the amendment. And that is what is called the Volstead Act that you referenced.
Gotcha.
The problem with the Volstead Act is that it was really complicated. It was like 72 separate sections, and some of them contradicted each other and also like contradicted other criminal laws that already existed. And there was all these procedures that didn't make sense. And it just created this massive administrative and legal issue. So governments were like, this is not a priority. This is a mess to try to enforce prohibition. And in particular, the Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover administrations all committed just the bare minimum amount of money necessary to enforce the Volstead Act. They were like, what do you need? $1? $5? They were just like not trying to fund this thing. And as a result, people knew they could violate it constantly. And one of the biggest critiques of prohibition is that it arguably caused criminality to just increase because bootlegging, moonshining, and speakeasies all thrived during Prohibition as these viable jobs for criminal enterprises and a lot of organized crime.
It's the war on drugs.
Yeah, it's the war on drugs. Exactly. This is what we see when you prohibit things, when you do this abstinence imposed morality legislation. It just creates a lot more criminals who are doing it in shady ways that are really dangerous for people. So illegal marketers developed a super strong black market, and it was super profitable because now drinkers would pay 3 to 4 times the price of what they had been paying before. And Americans were still consuming alcohol. But the amount did drop pretty dramatically to less than 1.5 gallons of pure alcohol per person per year. There was still this thing, though, where you're like, the alcohol's coming from somewhere. And it turns out it was coming from like pretty much anywhere you could find it. Like you said, they were finding new ways to market things that weren't traditionally thought of as alcohol. They were just like, yeah, it's perfume, or yeah, it's this product or whatever. Car radiators, for example, needed antifreeze in the winter, and cars were starting to get popular at this time. So they would just like skim some of the alcohol from the antifreeze off the top and sell it to bootleggers. There was also homemade beer and wine, which was not illegal necessarily, but it was kind of sold around and passed around, and that part was illegal. During the first 5 years of Prohibition, the acreage of vineyards actually increased 700%. And this is something we learned at the funny Fresno Speakeasy, but grapes were marketed as concentrate in blocks of port or blocks of Rhine wine, and they had warning labels on them that were instructions for how to make wine. So, for example, no, you say it. It was so funny when the guy told us. I loved it.
It was like, do not take this grape juice and put it in this vessel. Do not add this yeast. Do not let it sit in this particular temperature or environment and let it ferment. Certainly do not do any of these things. It was instructions for winemaking, right?
Yeah, exactly. It said, after dissolving the brick in a gallon of water, do not place the liquid in the jug away in a cupboard for 20 days because then it would turn into wine.
Yeah.
And so people would buy it and they'd be like, cool, I'm making wine or whatever. And of course, there were speakeasies, which I think are pretty famous in our minds from this era. They were just illegal bars that were kept in secret. And the reason they were called speakeasy is because you had to speak easily, quietly, right, to avoid detection once you were inside. And in New York City alone, there was an estimated 20,000 to 100,000 speakeasies. There is so many speakeasies. And they would vary wildly. You'd have like really small setups that would just serve moonshine in someone's basement, in someone's house. Then you'd have like huge glamorous nightclubs that were like massive in what we think of as like the roaring 20s with like full bands and dancing where they could actually be loud because they were bribing everybody. And this would be like the Cotton Club, which was really famous at this time. But the thing about these speakeasies is they were actually ridiculously expensive. Like going out to one of them for most people would be the equivalent of going to like a bottle club now, where you would pay like $600 for a liter of vodka. Like it was like this really expensive experience. It was high end. It was sophisticated. It was like for rich people, basically. These speakeasies we really think of, unless you're just talking about like moonshine in your neighbor's basement, right? But for the ones we really think of as embodying the roaring 20s, yeah, this was just like a playground for the wealthy. And if you could afford it, sure, it'd be super fun, especially because for the first time, we started to see women in drinking establishments. Women weren't really drinking with the men in these establishments. They might work in an ale house, for example, but they wouldn't be sitting there next to them throwing back drinks and dancing. So now you've got this place where you're like, oh, and there are girls there? Like, what? So it was fun. And it also, though, did create this dramatic shift in the way that women drank. Like in the decades prior to Prohibition, it was just not common for women to drink alcohol in public. And when they did, it was usually not around men. In some states, it was actually illegal for women to go into saloons. But in speakeasies, they were like actively courting women to come there. They were like, look, we have restaurants, we have dancing, we have beautiful powder rooms. Like, you should come, because they knew that women being there was one of the reasons that men would also go there and spend a lot of money on drinks. It's a whole argument about like ladies' night, how it's like ladies' night isn't actually like a win for women. It's just like, you're the product, babe. Like you're what they're selling.
Well, that's so wild because wasn't the like, I mean, the stereotypical face of the temperance movement is a group of white women glaring at you. Like that's like every picture I've ever seen of the spearhead of the temperance movement. It's really funny. It's like religious white women. Like,
yeah, and it's sad. because a
So,
lot of them were like, oh, our husbands are abusive. Maybe it's alcohol's fault. And it really is a really tragic story of domestic violence that helped kind of push the
oh God.
prohibition movement. No, it's really, really sad. And you kind of have, there's this like picture that I talk about a lot that's like accidentally, I think, very brilliant. And it was this protest, like maybe in the late 80s or early 90s, where these feminists were protesting Hooters. And there's a woman outside, she's feminist, she's holding a sign that says women are not decorations. And she, is very second wave feminist, not presenting super feminine, not wearing makeup, not doing the whole thing. And then you've got a Hooters girl in the little shorts and the tight shirt with the push-up bra standing next to her holding a sign that says some. So it reads, some women are not decoration. And it's supposed to be like, haha, the hot girl with the big tits just own this stupid feminist. But when you look at it really, you're like, no, actually, this is perfectly right. This is correct. Like, some women have found ways to commodify themselves under capitalism in a way that to them is the same as like exploitation of labor in any other form. And this is just the one that they ended up with. And they're like, hey, all work is exploitation of the body under capitalism. What's the difference? And then you see other women who are like, well, I don't want to do that though. And I shouldn't be forced to do that. And you're like, this is like the feminist dilemma under capitalism. Like this is summed up perfectly. And this is kind of what you see going on with the roaring 20s, the prohibition. You have these women who have been forced into these really bad situations and they're victims of the patriarchy in one way, right? Where you're like, yeah, these women are being abused by their husbands. They just want their suffering to end. And this is like so sad. And then you see women on the flip side who are also victims of the patriarchy, where they are being dolled up and served on a platter to be the product sold at these glamorous high-end nightclubs. And it's just a matter of choose your poison. It's just a matter of how society views you in this moment, because there's also the age difference. You have the young women going out to the nightclubs dancing, and they are the women who eventually will be the wives who are encountering domestic violence in their homes. There's the time in between the two, right? Like you're looking at sometimes the same women just years apart. So I think it is a really interesting like idea about like the feminist condition and the complicated choices you're forced to make under capitalism when nobody actually cares about your well-being. But whatever the case, the fact that women were enjoying going out drinking and dancing, which I understand because I enjoy going out drinking and dancing, this kind of showed the capitalists in charge anyway, like, hey, there's a market for this. And that is the seed that was planted that actually forever changed nightlife after that. So the way that these speakeasies stayed open is that the owners were usually bribing police and government officials to avoid raids. They also implemented some safety precautions in case a raid actually happened and they didn't get advance notice or somebody wasn't on the payroll. So they would obviously have the famous things, which are like the secret knocks and the passwords for admittance. Some, though, also developed these really elaborate systems to destroy incriminating evidence. Have you heard about the 21 Club in New York, Tori? Do you know about this?
Oh, you're about to school me on something.
Oh, no, it's just a funny one. In the event of a raid, they had a special button you would push that caused all the alcohol bottles to slide down a shaft that was designed to break the glass on a pile of rocks below. So they'd be like, we don't have any alcohol. I don't know what you're talking about. Bloop.
Wait, they would shatter.
Yeah,
Like,
they would shatter.
They literally break, so you couldn't be accused of actually selling alcohol because it's like, no, that's just the ground's just wet. That's broken glass.
And there was rocks at the bottom of the shaft, so it was like super gnarly. Yeah. But obviously, like we mentioned earlier, these speakeasies really did contribute to the rise of organized crime in the United States because lots of these establishments were owned by gangsters. They owned the bars and they sold the bootlegged alcohol to the bars. And since it's pretty expensive and just kind of like a whole thing, a lot of people really did just switch to at-home drinking. They just couldn't justify paying these inflated prices of alcohol at the speakeasies. And for the people who couldn't afford to buy those speakeasy alcohols, right, which had some sort of reputation, because if you were at a speakeasy, killed a bunch of people with bad bootleg alcohol, nobody's going to go there anymore. But for the people drinking at home, there was no even like word of mouth or reputation to kind of protect them from consuming bad alcohol. So the trade in unregulated alcohol obviously had serious health consequences for people. It became more lucrative and the quality of the alcohol in the black market started declining. More people tried to get into it who didn't really know what they were doing. On average, 1,000 Americans died every single year during the Prohibition just from drinking tainted liquor, which is pretty scary. Weirdly, though, despite all this, people were pretty into Prohibition up until the Great Depression hit. And that's when everybody was like, oh, maybe we're not so into this, because all of a sudden, people who had hated prohibition were like, hey, you know what would really introduce a lot more jobs into the American economy? If we made
Legal.
alcohol legal again. Yeah. And then also, like, what if we taxed the alcohol and brought in revenue for public spending projects? And Roosevelt actually campaigned super hard on these issues when he was running for president. And after he was elected in 1932, he promoted prohibition repeal as a key part of the recovery program. And in December 1933, the 21st Amendment ended what Roosevelt called the damnable affliction of prohibition. And prohibition came to represent the futility of governmental attempts to legislate morality.
Wait, are you gonna say the line?
No, what's the
What?
line?
Oh shit! What did he say? What Roosevelt when it ultimately was repealed. Oh God, I gotta look up the quote because it's pretty good.
Okay, that sounds worth it.
Yeah. It's something about what the nope, can't find it. Oh well. It's something like what America needs now is a drink. Like
Oh yeah, I
nope,
do remember that.
nope,
Yeah.
no, it's that. Oh, I got it right. That's literally what it is. What America needs now is a drink, which is like rough to hear in that way, but it's a pretty funny thing for the president of the United States to say.
Yeah, well, and that's too. It's like these rich guys; they were still drinking the whole
Well,
time.
that's yeah. I knew you were gonna get to that, and that's like yeah. This disproportionately affected, of course, people who were poor.
Yeah,
The wealthy,
like every law,
yeah, they were all
legal
still
for the
drinking.
rich. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from the period from let's say 1960 to 1985, following prohibition, you pointed this out, Tori, but there really was like a renaissance in alcohol and how alcohol was treated. And this period after, prohibition is where we really see bar culture and nightlife culture start to develop in an interesting way. We also see cocktails really start to change and like move around, and like cocktails are getting developed in new and interesting ways. By 1985, drinking had kind of picked up back again. We were up to around 2 to 3 gallons per person per year. And this was the equivalent around 2 drinks on average per adult per day, which is a lot actually of drinking. I would say I have 2 drinks per week. No, you know what? I would say that if I go out, I have 2 to 4 drinks, and I don't go out. I usually go out once a week if I go out. So I guess this is like, maybe slightly more than I drink, but not that much. But when you look at the distribution, it's not actually like everybody is drinking 2 drinks a day. It's more like a third of the adult population does 95% of the drinking.
Is
Yeah.
it actually 95%?
Yeah. A third of the population does 95%.
It makes sense because I
Yeah.
know how people binge drink, but yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. And from 1985 to now, approximately 1/3 of all adults say they don't drink any alcohol at all. Like a third of adults in one survey were like, I've had 0 alcohol in the past year. And this figure is really down from the late 1950s when 45% of all adults reported abstaining. So, we do see people are drinking a little bit more than they used to. You see all these reports about how young people don't drink as much as they used to. Like teenagers are more interested in just smoking weed than drinking,
like
which is
right
probably
now?
good. Yeah, like right now,
Oh yeah.
because I
Oh yeah.
think that's really good because when like I grew up in a city, so I didn't experience this as much. But when I started meeting people like in college or, who grew up in smaller towns, all of them were like, yeah, the thing you did for fun was get drunk and drive around in my high school. And everyone died in car crashes. And I was like, yeah, no shit, that's fucking crazy. And they'd be like, well, you guys didn't do that? And I'd be like, no, we took the city bus to house parties. We
Yeah.
didn't have this. So it is good, obviously, that teenagers are drinking less, but on the whole, there's not quite this like, major shift market wise where people don't want to drink as much anymore. It's like kind of consistent ish. And another third of the population reports drinking very little, like fewer than 3 drinks a week. And the next fifth or so of the population drinks 2 drinks per day. And then the next 10th of all adults average 3 or more drinks per day. And this is twice as likely to be men than women in this category. And then the last 1 to 4% of the population averages 10 or more drinks per day. And this is really where almost every single person being treated for alcoholism today lands kind of on this. This is the most common. Like if you're drinking 10 drinks a day, that's where you're going to be if you're being treated for alcoholism. So in the United States, though, we still have a pretty unique approach to legislating alcohol consumption. Like here, our legal drinking age is 21, and that's pretty old by global standards. The most common age to legally drink is 18 around the world. 64% of countries have 18 as their legal drinking age. The youngest age is 15. That is in a few countries. And I even know that it's like so different from state to state, because by this point I've traveled to most of the US states, and the alcohol laws, the liquor laws are really interesting. Tori, I know you always say that it's really different buying alcohol in New York where you live versus in California. Like, what's the main difference you notice?
Well, no, I mean, it's just across the country, it is wild how different alcohol laws are, and how, if you go into the history of it, it goes way back to like the liquor laws in New York are clearly influenced by like wild puritanical, like literally Puritans, like
Yeah.
not like puritanical, like metaphorically, like literal Puritans, like had influence. And like, in California, you can buy liquor at a gas station. And I believe in several states in the South, there are drive-through liquor stores. In New York, you can only buy liquor at a place that sells liquor. And that place it sells liquor and wine, and it's not allowed to sell anything else. But you can buy beer at your corner store 24/7. Like literally,
Like there's no time limit on beer.
There's no, whereas in California at 2:00, all sale of all alcohol stops everywhere.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. But in New York City, I can walk down and get a sandwich and a beer at 5 in the morning, or 4 in the morning. And, that's bad. I have definitely done that.
Well, it's not as bad as here in California. What people do to hack it is when the bars close at 2 a.m., they're allowed to start drinking again at 6 a.m. And there's a bar called the Drawing Room in Los Feliz that opens at 6 a.m. And you'll see people just waiting outside for it to open.
Oh, yeah.
In between the first bar closing and that bar opening again for the next day. So it's kind of like, it's like the prohibition stuff. It's like people find a way to work around whatever. If people want to drink, they're gonna drink. But yeah, different states have all these different laws about when and how you can buy alcohol, and most of them are influenced heavily by religion, I would say. So like in Utah, Texas, Mississippi, and North Carolina, you cannot purchase alcohol on a Sunday.
Oh yeah.
That's wild to me. In Alaska and Maryland, you cannot buy alcohol in a grocery store, which is interesting. Oh, I went to visit my grandmother in Montana, and that's where I learned that there were state-run liquor stores.
I was going to say, yeah, there's dry states, obviously, also, but state-run liquor stores were the only place. When we drove through, I forget where we drove through, but we definitely saw like the state-run liquor store sign, and it was like, this is the only place. And people cross state lines just because they're like, oh, I can't get liquor here, so I'm going to go across, buy some beer, and come back.
Right. Also in Alaska, Indiana, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Utah, and Vermont, happy hour is literally illegal. You cannot serve discounted alcohol after work hours, which is wild to me. In Massachusetts and Alaska, you cannot sell alcohol on election day while polls are open.
That's to prevent undue influence, right?
Yeah. So well, I would, so you're not drunk and voting, just like, I'll do that, which is funny. It's like the whole country was drunk voting. It was 5 drunk guys at a tavern setting up all the laws, and I can't be drunk and vote. I want freedom.
No, I actually think that this maybe this is like one of those things that's like, this is an alcohol story, but the way I heard it, which now that I think about it is probably apocryphal, but was like, it means that you couldn't be like, here's a free drink, vote for my guy.
Oh, you know what? I did hear that too.
Like it's like, you want, hey, let's get drunk. Let's talk about how good this guy is. Like,
okay, that does make sense to me, actually. No, I think I have heard that.
Well, and real quick, in New York City, they literally just changed the law like a week ago. Liquor stores can open before they couldn't open before, it was on Sunday. They had to close, or they weren't allowed to be open at a certain time, but now liquor stores can be open at the normal hours. But that's how recent stuff is.
It's wild. I mean, our whole country's so recent when you think about it.
Right.
You got the bar that opened in 900. Our stupid country didn't exist for another 900
Right.
years. In Ireland, they got
Right.
a bar that was open 1,000 years before our country existed.
Well, okay,
Um,
my favorite. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna let
no,
you.
you go.
I don't. This is my favorite absurd. This is like bar law. Do you have anything on the docket about cabaret law?
No, what's the
Do you know
cabaret
about
law?
cabaret law?
No.
This is the most insane thing. Like until 2017, it was illegal to dance in New York City unless you had a license for your bar to dance. It's
Oh,
called the
wait.
cabaret.
This existed in Fresno because all of our punk shows got shut down because we didn't have a dance permit.
Okay, so
And I
this
thought
is
this
a
was
thing.
normal. And someone on the internet was like, what in the footloose is this? You know?
Yeah, no, it was a law on the books that was developed during, I believe, the Jazz Age, and very specifically, you might think, was targeted at certain people of color,
Probably,
because
yes.
they literally had limits on the number of musicians you could have on stage. And guess what a jazz band needs? More
A
than
lot of
three. It
musicians.
was three
Yeah.
musicians. You had to have three or less musicians, and oh no, I forget exactly that, but it was absolutely targeted at like the Harlem Renaissance, like while jazz
Wow.
was like happening, and like people like clubs would get shut down because they didn't have permits, and performers would get shut down because they didn't have permits, and then going for somehow this existed on the books until 2017, and of course was selectively enforced,
Against
where
mostly Black people, people of color.
yeah, or just whoever's whim. And guess who was one of the biggest proponents of it? Mr. Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, of course. Of
Yeah,
course. That shitbag loved it. Fucking
he
loved
fucking
it.
loved cabaret law,
That guy's
and
never had fun in his life. Hates everything.
and
What kind of music do you think Rudy Giuliani listens to? Just the
it
sound
would
of
be.
children screaming and it brings him joy.
Yeah, I what I really want him to listen to is the song Metro Card by Latigra, because
Oh, yeah.
it shouts him out as being the death of nightlife. So
Yeah. Man, fuck Giuliani. He's
yeah,
such a
shut down
fucking, yeah.
shut down all the strip clubs, right?
Right. Shut down all the strip clubs. Yeah. Okay, so I've got some more weird liquor laws riding off the back of the cabaret law. Up
Yeah.
until 2019, all beer served at bars or sold in grocery stores in Utah had to be at or below 3.2% alcohol content. That has now been upped to 5%. But the only place to find more alcohol, like alcohol with like higher content anyway, would be at distilleries or liquor stores. Utah also prohibits the sale of miniature alcohol bottles, like the minis. You can only get them on airplanes and in hotels. And Nevada is the only state where you can buy alcohol any hour of the day. Unlike other states, there's like a designated last call time for bars. Like in California, it's 2. In New York, it's 4. No, Nevada has no required last call. You can just
Las
be
Vegas,
drinking,
baby.
stay drinking. Yeah, Las Vegas. I honestly think that the fact that California bars close at 2 a.m. is absolutely unhinged. Like, I don't want to go out until midnight and then I got to be done at 2 a.m. or find an after hours. Like, everyone just goes to after hours. So it's that thing about the prohibition, though. It's like, well, it just encourages criminality. Now you're just going to unregulated illegal spots, you know? Because like house parties get shut down and the bars have to close. So it just leaves like that third thing where a dude bribed a guy and rented a shitty commercial space that's like not properly permitted and doesn't have safety exits. And also Louisiana famously has drive-through daiquiri spots. I love these. I went with Chris's sister on Christmas Eve one year and it was so fun. And I couldn't even believe it was real. It was awesome. Yeah, so those are kind of the interesting laws, and kind of the alcohol contents was really interesting to me, of like things like the beer and the 3.2%. And there's all this like booze math that I didn't really understand. So I was like, I'm going to try to figure that out. And what I learned is that the 3 main categories of alcohol, it's beer, wine, and distilled spirits, right? And the common denominator, like you were saying, is ethyl alcohol. And the amount that's in every beverage varies from beverage to beverage, from drink to drink. So beer typically is 3 to 6% alcohol by volume. So the fact that it should only be 3.2% in Utah was really wild, but 5% is a little more acceptable. That feels normal for a beer. Light beer would be at the low end. Malt liquor would be at the high end. I guess wine is generally 10 to 20% alcohol, with table wine being lower and those fortified dessert wines being higher. And then spirits, which is what I drink, are usually bottled at 40% alcohol, which is like 80 proof. And I never understood what the proofs mean. It's like the proof just double the alcohol percent.
It's literally just double the alcohol percentage. Yeah.
Okay. So then you get like higher proofs if you have like special label alcohols.
Yeah. So anything over 40. No. Just anything over 40% is considered overproof. And so people will market their whiskeys as overproof. There's also like once it gets above a certain percentage, the flammability comes into concern.
I didn't even think of that.
There are special bottles that have extremely high alcohol content have special little rings that limit the flow to reduce flammability.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And also that leads me to one thing I've obviously said to you before, but my biggest pet peeve in the world is when people make Molotov cocktails out of alcohol that is not flammable, because the flammability relies on the percentage, and you can't make a Molotov cocktail out of most like 40% alcohol.
Interesting. The thing that I thought was really interesting about all of this is that the percents of everything means that a 12-ounce can with 4% beer, or a 4-ounce serving of 12% wine, or a cocktail with around a shot glass's worth of 80 proof spirits, those all have the exact same amount of alcohol.
Right.
And that is so wild to me, because I would not guess that, because if I drink hard liquor, it feels like I'm drinking more alcohol than a beer, even if it's just one drink each. But like a cocktail and a beer, generally speaking, have the same amount of alcohol. And that was like really, really shocking to me, because it doesn't feel right. So then I realized there's like all this stuff about how alcohol works that I didn't understand. So I looked into like the science of how alcohol works in your body. And once it's like consumed, it passes through your stomach to your small intestine, and that's where it's like rapidly absorbed and gets diffused through your body. And the most common lab measure of drunkenness, right, is your blood alcohol content, your BAC. And it's usually expressed in terms of weight of alcohol that's found in a standard volume of blood. So like a grams percent is what they usually say. So a reading of like 0.1% BAC means there's 0.1 grams of pure alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood in your system. And livers metabolize alcohol at an average rate of around 1 drink per hour. So drinking in excess of 1 drink per hour is what will raise your drunkenness. So if you're just keeping steady at 1 drink per hour, you're probably not going to get drunk. Probably.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But if you're doing more than 1 drink per hour, you're going to keep upping your blood alcohol content.
Right. But if you drank a certain amount, like it would also only maintain and not get you drunker. You're only drinking one. Okay,
just 1 drink per hour. I mean, there's some variation in here, because obviously clearance rates and other physiological characteristics are going to vary greatly. Some people are more sensitive to alcohol than others. How drunk you get is also impacted by your age, if you're sick, if you're fatigued, what your tolerance to alcohol is, your body weight, your gender, the spacing of drinks. They say gender, they probably mean biological sex. They probably just conflated those two. Metabolic rates, how much food has been eaten that day, the drinker's expectations. There's a psychological element to it. And even expectations of others going along with the psychological element. And this thing I read that was so funny to me for some reason was just like, a skinny teenager anticipating a big night with friends can become exhilarated on a quantity of alcohol that would produce no effect in a heavy middle-aged man who had just finished a large dinner. And I just thought that was really silly, but it's true.
It's a very funny hypothetical.
It really is. Yeah. It's like me versus my dad drinking when I was a teenager. So there is like also, just the physical effects of drunkenness. And I was like trying to think about this, and I'm like, what is drunk? Like, what does drunk feel like to me? And it was actually really hard for me to figure out. What does being drunk feel like to you? How do you describe it?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm a professional drinker. Like it's literally my job. So um I don't know.
Okay, so here's what I came up with. It's
Sorry,
embarrassing.
oh wait, I got one. The
Oh, you
term that I
did?
came up with, the term that I came up with like 20 years ago when I first got drunk at 20 because I was a nerd. I didn't drink until college. Was
And look
that
at you now.
Yeah, totally. They turned it into a job. Social lubricant was the thing that I came up with, and maybe that's just because I have social anxiety, but I was like, it makes it easier to not be nervous around other people. That's
Oh, okay, that makes sense. For me, what I came up with is a lot less eloquent than that. I came up with world feels swirly. That one.
Gotcha.
World real swirly. Your car key can open the front door of your house if you just try hard enough. There are many, many nights when I would walk home from the bar and I would get my key out to open the front door of my apartment building, but it would just be my car key with the button. And I would stand in front of my apartment building, pushing the button to my car key while looking at the front door of my apartment. Like, why is it not opening? And I just kept doing it and like, it's going to work. Okay. The next thing I realized about how drunkenness feels, walking is not your friend. That is not a good idea. You don't want to walk at all if possible. Also, similarly, volume control does not exist. There's one volume and it's the loud one. That's what you're getting out of me. That's the only volume that my body can emit. Also, fighting with everyone sounds like a great idea. This is my experience of drunkenness. And it turns out the scientific effects of measuring physical drunkenness include loss of precise reasoning, that car key thing, hand-eye coordination, world feels swirly. Yeah. Balance while moving. Walking is not your friend. Okay. And I swear I didn't look at these before I came up with my list. Alertness and noticing hazards. Probably fighting with everybody sounds like a great idea, maybe. Yeah. Reliability in interpreting what you observe. Volume control does not exist, maybe. And also the car key, trying to open the house thing. And focus. No focus. Just none. So for most people, having 3 drinks in an hour is going to get you a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. And that is really where your physical skills start to deteriorate. When you get up to something more like 0.08 to 0.1%, like double that 3 drinks in an hour, this is where you are legally drunk. This is for most people, though. And at 0.15 to 0.3%, you're going to lose consciousness. And above that, you're going to maybe die from respiratory issues or inhaling vomit while you pass out. Like it's going to get real bad after that. So I wanted to figure this out on myself because I am a relatively small person. I always say I'm child sized. So, I'm like, 6 drinks really to get me legally intoxicated? It didn't quite feel right for me. I was trying to think about this. I know you don't drive. For me, driving is like the thing that in my head, I'm like, I would not operate a vehicle at this level of drunkenness. But like, how many drinks for you, theoretically, if you did drive a car, Tori, would you be like, we're not driving at this juncture?
It's a really hard question. I've asked myself that. It's the reason that I don't ride a bike when I go to work because I inevitably drink at work unless I'm intentionally taking time off. And I mean, my answer is like, honestly, I just wouldn't. Like the point at which alcohol impedes your ability to like function and be safe, obviously that's the issue. That's my job as a bartender is to make sure people don't drink too much. I cut a guy off last night. I was at the bar till 4 a.m. and I was working, and this guy was like clearly a little drunk. And he was like, I want another shot. And I said, hey, like, you told me earlier that you didn't want to get too drunk. So let's not do that. And I handed him water, and he was like, you're right. And he drank it and he walked out. And I was like, that dude's gonna be okay. Like,
Yeah.
not to drive, but
No,
like
no. It's New York City. He's not driving probably
yeah,
anyway.
he's gonna get home safe. And like that's great. Like, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I was thinking about my own limits, and then I had this like moment of panic where I was like, oh, what if what I think I'm safe to drive a car at, actually I'm not safe to drive a car at, and I've actually been really irresponsible with my drinking my entire adult life, and I just haven't realized it. Because like one thing I was like, I would never drive a car drunk. Like, what? That's crazy. And then I was like, what if somehow I am and I don't realize that I'm all right? What? So I did this online calculator that takes into account like your size and like all these things about you. And I plugged in all my information, and the online calculator kind of actually confirmed everything I had intuitively thought about myself. So at one drink, my blood alcohol content level would be so well below that first threshold where you start to notice physical skills deteriorate that I wouldn't even register. So one drink, we're having no physical reaction whatsoever. One drink's not registering in my body. At 2 drinks, I was under the legal intoxication limit of 0.08 to 0.1%. At 3 drinks, and this is assuming I'm having, a drink roughly per hour, but because I'm smaller, my liver's not going to metabolize 1 drink per hour fully, right? So I'm going to have some carry over from each drink because I'm a smaller person, and it's going to stay in my system a little bit longer. So, I usually drink 1 drink per hour if I'm doing this. So at 3 drinks, yes, I would be officially drunk with a blood alcohol content level of 0.11. But the other day, you and I went to a wedding, and I probably had 6 or 7 drinks over the course of 6 or 7 hours. There was an open bar at that wedding. We got drinks beforehand. I mean, I was drinking that day. I mean, I still paced myself, but I would say by the end of that day, I did not feel any effects of alcohol whatsoever. I felt stone sober 99.9% of that day. And the 0.1% I felt maybe a little tipsy. So it's just one of those things where you're like, well, it's so different for everybody. And also like, it depends on what you ate that day. It depends on what you're doing, the social expectation.
But the social expectation, and there's another subjective element to it, which is that you were enduring physical duress at that point. You were having some
Health issues.
Gluten sensitivity or whatever. And I will say that one of the things that has had, like, this is a different version of that, but physical things will snap you out of it. And the idea of like, there's the joke, the classic is, oh, this guy drank non-alcoholic beer all night and was like, I'm wasted, and he didn't realize it was non-alcoholic beer. Have you like heard of that like sort of trope?
Yeah, it's like a trope.
Like, yeah, but it's like there is something to be said for our, the way, I mean, you of all people know that like our experience is plastic in a lot of ways, like the way that we like sort of, our memory is plastic, and the way our brains experience things is like it's easy to manipulate that even without like actual like material elements. And one of the things is like, listen, I've been like drunk at the bar and something's gone down and I'm sober all of a sudden, not 100% sober, but my someone is in danger and I will snap out of it. And like, doesn't mean I'm doing the best work I've ever done. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm like suddenly like 100%, but it does mean that like, adrenaline or other elements of your, I don't know, neurological system. I have no idea what the chemical explanation would be for it, but yeah, your expectations and your environment and your current situation can affect the way that alcohol affects you.
Yeah. So that's, I think, an important thing to remember too, because it's like, I'm glad that I never looked up my size and how like the 1 drink per hour and the metabolizing, because knowing me and how much I like love science and facts, I could see myself looking this up, when I was younger and being like, okay, good. So like 2 drinks, I'm okay to drive, 3 drinks off limits. But then it's like, well, what if you didn't eat as much that day? What if something else was happening? And, I'm not an idiot, right? I think I would like to think that I would always know when I was like it's encountering the physical effects of alcohol consumption to a degree that I was not able to responsibly interact in society, operating a giant fucking machine that could kill people. Yeah. Right. But who knows, especially when I was younger and I didn't really know what to expect. I think it was good that I developed like an intuitive, instinctive relationship with myself where I could be like, no, this is not good. And it has happened a couple times where I've been like, there is no way I can operate a vehicle right now. Like one time in particular, I was on antibiotics and I forgot. I had 1 drink at a party, totally forgot antibiotics mess with alcohol in your body. And I felt more drunk after one drink on antibiotics than I ever have in my life. I felt violently ill and I had to leave my car and just like call an Uber. And it's kind of a funny story because the guy thought I was super, super trash. And I was trying to explain to him, like, no, I forgot I was on antibiotics. But I remember he looked at me and he got out of the car while I was standing in front of this house party. And he did the eye contact thing with the 2 fingers. You know, he was like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I was like, yeah, but I was super wobbly because like
Yeah.
antibiotics and alcohol do not mix. I was messed up. And he's like, are you going to throw up in my car? And I was like, no. And he was like, fuck. Man, all right, I guess it's fine, get in. And he was like taking a gamble on me in that moment, you know? But it's like, that's the situation where you're like, you can't come up with these hard and fast rules for yourself. It's like, if you feel drunk, like, don't get in the car, like, don't do it. And like, drunk driving is a major, major issue. We talked about it a little bit. We did like an episode about like transportation and cars and driving in the United States, but it's a huge fatal issue. It is really, really serious. And it's like not, sometimes you meet people and you don't know them super well and they're like, haha, I was a little drunk last night. And then the story progresses and you're like, you fucking drove a car home and you were drunk. You told me you were drinking, you drove a car home. Like, yeah, that's not okay. Like, that's like going into a crowd and shooting a loaded weapon. Like, you're just lucky you didn't hit somebody. Like, that's so wild. And this kind of leads you to this whole thought process, right? Where you're like, well, there are all these problems that can come around with drinking. You can look at alcohol and you can be like, oh, it's something that's like so integrated into our cultural experience as human beings and it has this huge history. But like the reality is that as people began distilling alcohols and alcohols became more and more potent, right? These negative consequences have come along with it. And like one is the vehicular murder thing that can come along with people drinking and driving. And like when I was in college and I started meeting people and hearing how many of my friends had lost friends as teenagers in drunk driving incidents because they just were drinking and driving around a car, that blew my mind. Like that's a choice that we can make, but it's also a policy choice, right? It's like a policy choice in the United States to not provide public transportation or infrastructure for people. And you know, all these things are like interconnected in this really gnarly way. We do the personal accountability thing, and there is an element of personal accountability. Like, you know not to get in a car when you feel drunk. That's it. Like, you don't do it. Don't get in the car. Don't even think about it. But there is also, the infrastructure issues. And there's, like the medical issues associated with alcoholism too. And when people first started to like look at alcoholism, it was after like distilled spirits started to get more and more popular. And there were these 2 graduates of Edinburgh College of Medicine named Thomas Trotter in Britain and Benjamin Rush, who was in the colonies of the United States. And they were kind of the first people to make important contributions to the clinical recognition of alcoholism as a chronic life-threatening disease. And so Trotter in an 1813 essay described alcohol abuse as a disease maybe for the first time and recognized that habitual and prolonged consumption of hard liquor could cause liver disease accompanied with jaundice and like mental dysfunction that would even be evident when a patient was sober. And Rush published similar ideas in an American journal. And he had also been a pretty prominent member of society. Like he had signed the Declaration of Independence. So when they both said that, people really started to pay attention. And this was obviously before Prohibition, but when we started to see people kind of look at alcoholism and just kind of veer the opposite direction completely. Like we had people like drunk every single day, and then we go the opposite direction. We're like, no alcohol whatsoever. And you kind of see why. It's like today alcohol contributes to about 90,000 deaths in the United States alone every single year. And that makes it one of the top 10 risk factors for poor health in the United States. And there are all these things we know now, even more than what like Thomas Trotter and Benjamin Rush are talking about. We know high blood pressure, we know heart disease, we know stroke, we know liver disease, we know digestive problems, we know breast, mouth, throat, esophagus, voice box, liver, colon, rectal cancer. And we know weakened immune systems, increasing your chances of getting sick. We know learning and memory problems. We know dementia. We know poor school performance. Mental health problems like depression, anxiety can be exacerbated. Social problems, family problems, job-related problems, unemployment. We know all of this stuff can come along with alcohol consumption to excess. And also like that doesn't even touch base on things like getting in a car and driving it drunk or whatever. But it also like isn't all doom and gloom. There's also all of this evidence that shows that moderate alcohol consumption can actually provide some health benefits.
I thought we were going to get here.
Yeah.
And, well, this the moderate alcohol thing is a very interesting subject. But one of the most rigorous studies, like Here's the deal. People often quote the thing that says, oh, yeah, one glass of wine is actually good for you. One glass of wine a day is actually moderate drinkers are good. But there was a comprehensive study of 5 million people and their drinking habits. And what came out was that, yes, moderate drinking can be okay for you and might not drastically impact your life expectancy. The idea that one glass of wine is better than zero, it was a statistical anomaly that was created because they didn't account for teetotalers who had been lifelong alcoholics, who had already done so much damage to their body by drinking that even if they stopped drinking, they still had a lower life expectancy. Whereas people who just drank a glass of wine a day, one like moderate drinking, it's not gonna necessarily kill you. But if you're a binge drinker most of your life and then you cut it out, there is like cumulative damage. And it's like,
Right.
unfortunately, that myth has been like very prevalent. And it's like, sorry, that's the only reason I bring it up. It's like,
No,
you're
it
right,
is
it's not
good. I
human.
mean, the thing about the moderate alcohol consumption that actually can have positive health outcomes, the only one that's physical is that when you consume alcohol, you're more likely to like urinate a lot, and that can make you less likely to get kidney stones. That's the one thing they found. Yeah, because you're peeing more, and if you have small crystallized fragments in your urinary tract, it's less of a chance for them to build up. So if you drink beer, you're 40, like moderate amounts, right? You're 41% less likely to get kidney stones. And if you drink wine, it's 33%. And so it is pretty significant in those categories, but it's not because it's alcohol necessarily. It's just because you're drinking something that makes you pee a lot more. So for example, if you drink a ton of water every single day, like I have friends who drink like a ton of water, they would be the same. They would also be less likely to get kidney stones because they're urinating more frequently. The main way that moderate alcohol consumption can positively impact your health is actually psychological. And this is where we get into a lot of the more community building elements of like bars, bar culture. And the first place that I always think is super interesting to start with on all of this is the history of gay bars in the United States. Like gay bars have always been an essential part of queer history and like a safe place for like a lot of queer people to be. And for decades, gay bars were literally the only places where gay people could congregate and be openly gay. And, it's because obviously it was illegal to be gay many places in the United States, even up to the 1960s, based on sodomy laws dating back to the 1714 American colonies laws and legislations. Like this stuff just lingered. It was super religious and super homophobic and super weird. It was like, yeah, against the law for two men to dance together many places in the US up until even the 1960s, 1970s. We still have a lot of anti-gay legislation, obviously, today in different parts around the country. And gay bars were always a really important part of kind of undoing the stigma associated with being gay and like having like a safe space to practice queerness. And the first recorded instance we have of a gay bar, obviously gay bars were probably existing way before this, but the first one we have like written down somewhere in history was a gay bar in London in the year 1810 called the White Swan. And we only know about it because it was raided under sodomy laws, anti-sodomy laws. And that night that it was raided, this place that historically obviously provided so much comfort for queer people in the community, that night 25 men were arrested, 8 were later convicted, and 2 were actually hanged because of that. And one was only 16 years old just for being in a gay bar, which is really, really, really gnarly. But this bar up until then had been, a place to safely express queerness. And in the United States, we have around the same time, there was a bar called The Slide in New York City in the late 1800s. Have you ever heard of The Slide? You're a New Yorker. I had never heard of it either. So Joseph Pulitzer, like the Pulitzer Prize guy, he had a newspaper called New York Evening, and it talked about The Slide, and it said, London, Paris, or Berlin, with all their iniquity, have nothing to parallel this sink of vice and depravity. And this paper was like really laying into The Slide over and over and over again. It also said once, much had been written about the degradation, corruption, and wickedness in the slums of the city, but there the poor wretches shrink from notoriety, while the abandoned creatures in Stevenson's The Slide make nightly a public exhibition of their evil doings. These beings without moral sense or shame are billed as the chief attraction in that pit of shame. And they just kind of like went on this tirade against this gay bar, and eventually it won, and the bar closed its doors permanently a few months later. There's also, jumping ahead a long time, where you start to see more documented cases of gay bars. There's the Black Cat, famously in San Francisco. That was one of the country's most popular gay bars in the 1950s. And the San Francisco Police Department then started this huge campaign against the bar and the people who went there. And it was on the grounds of maintaining a disorderly house that the San Francisco Police Department revoked the Black Cat's liquor license indefinitely. And the owner ended up taking the state to court, and the California Supreme Court ruled that in order to establish good cause for suspension of plaintiff's license, or something must more be shown than that many of his patrons were homosexuals and that they used his restaurant and bar as a meeting place. And this ended up being actually like a big victory in the world of gay bars. And there was a lot of gay rights stuff happening, obviously, all throughout history, fighting for equality. The first documented U.S. gay rights organization was called the Society for Human Rights, and that was founded in 1924 by Henry Gerber, who was a German immigrant. But there was also a lot of persecution that continued to occur. Like that gay rights organization, the Society for Human Rights, was disbanded in 1925, just a year later, because of police raids. They had already published several copies of a newsletter, though, called Friendship and Freedom, which was the first gay interest newsletter in the country. Then in 1955, America's first lesbian rights organization, called the Daughters of Bilitis was formed in San Francisco as well. So you kind of had this like struggle for gay rights, where it was illegal to be gay in public, and you had people just trying to live their lives, and you had activist groups, and you had all of this kind of swirling about in this giant, often violent and very, very terrifying mess with police departments and raids and whatnot going on in the United States. And even as this kept happening and gay bars would pop up and get shut down, they would just like keep opening. And that in itself was a sign of defiance, that they would just keep reopening, even though the raids were so frequent. And so if you were like a queer person visiting these bars, you would know that it was kind of a high risk activity. But again, it would be like the only place where you could seek any amount of like comfort and expression of queerness. So if you were at a bar and it did get raided, like usually your name would appear in the newspaper the next day. You could potentially lose your job if your employers were homophobic, which they probably were. Your address would often be posted, like they would fully dox you. You could have people coming to your house to yell at you about being gay. Jill McCall, who was a lesbian who was arrested at a place called The Club in 1966, said, "Our lives could have been ruined." She ended up booked for lewd and lascivious conduct one day, but her case ended up fortunately being dismissed, and she went back to the club the next night. Despite police harassment, she was just like, where else am I going to go? Like, this is the spot I'm supposed to be. And it's where also the resistance, movements of queer people really started to grow. So I actually found an example of another early gay bar in San Diego, where you spent your teenage years. It was in 1957, and it was called the Brass Rail, which is a great name.
Oh my God, the Brass Rail.
You know about it.
Shit. Yeah, it was still around when I was a kid. Like,
oh, it's so cool.
Wait, is it closed? I didn't even think about that. It's got to be closed now. Is it still around? Oh yeah, the Brass Rail. Holy shit.
Well, this guy, Lou Arco, was actually straight, but he bought it because he had a bunch of gay friends. And he was like, no, we're going to make it a gay bar. Like, I don't care. And that was in 1957. And it's cool that it lasted so long because so much other stuff got shut down. And famously, obviously, the one most of us know of when we think about gay bars is Stonewall.
Yeah.
So from 1966 to 1969, Stonewall made international news for, dealing with this exact kind of issue. Like the New York State Liquor Authority penalized and shut down all these establishments, all these gay bars that served alcohol to known or suspected gay individuals. You could be suspected of being gay, and then a place couldn't serve you alcohol. And the argument was that just when you had too many gay people in a place, it was disorderly. Which, I kind of respect, even though it was clearly awful. But I like the idea that you cannot make the rebellious gays be in order. And obviously this encouraged a lot of gay rights groups to start meeting, or just people who were at these bars to start talking to each other. And they started staging protests in opposition to this really bizarre, horrific, unjust law. So in 1966, members of the Madeline Society, which is an organization dedicated to gay rights, staged what they called a sip-in, where they openly declared their sexuality at taverns and then basically like punked staff. They were like calling their bluff. They like played chicken with them. They were like, oh yeah, okay, are you going to turn me away? Because if you do, I'm going to sue you. And so this was kind of like a cool protest, like activist move that a lot of queer people did. And then soon, because of these types of things, the Commission on Human Rights ruled that gay individuals had the right to be served in bars. So by 1966, gay patrons could be served alcohol, but engaging in gay behavior in public, like holding hands, kissing, or dancing with somebody of the same sex, that was still illegal. So the police harassment of gay bars continued, and many bars still operated without liquor licenses, in a big part because they were owned by the mafia. Like the crime syndicate saw profits in catering to these otherwise shunned gay clients, right? And by the mid-1960s, I can't pronounce it right, the Genovese crime family, I believe, they controlled most Greenwich Village gay bars. So in 1966, it was that family that purchased Stonewall Inn, which had been a straight bar and restaurant. Then they cheaply renovated it and reopened it the next year as a gay bar. And this was registered as a private bottle bar. And by doing that, they didn't need a liquor license because patrons were supposed to bring their own liquor. And patrons had to sign their names in a book upon entry to maintain this kind of fake idea that it was a private bottle bar. And the Genovese family was bribing New York's 6th Police Precinct to ignore these activities that occurred within the bar. And without this police interference, obviously, the crime family could cut costs wherever they wanted. The club, for example, did not have a fire exit. Running water did not exist behind the bar to wash glasses. Toilets were not clean. They routinely overflowed. The drinks were watered down beyond recognition. The mafia also blackmailed the club's wealthier patrons who wanted to keep their sexuality a secret. But even despite this, it's like the gay bar, the idea of a gay bar was so important for queer people that it still became this like super important Greenwich Village institution. It was large and relatively cheap to enter. It welcomed drag queens who weren't even welcomed to other gay bars and clubs a lot of the time. And it ended up being like a place that runaways or homeless gay youth could go and just be, and they would panhandle or shoplift to be able to afford that entry fee. And it was the only, or one of the only, depending on your source, gay bar left in New York that allowed dancing. So by 1969, these kind of raids, these police raids of gay bars were still a fact of life. But usually corrupt cops would tip off the mafia-run bars before they occurred, and this would allow owners to stash the alcohol, which was sold without a liquor license, and hide other illegal activities. But in June 28, 1969, a New York City police raid happened at the Stonewall Inn by surprise, like there was no tip-off. So they had a warrant, and police officers entered the club. They roughed up patrons. They found bootlegged alcohol. They arrested 13 people, including employees and people who were violating the state's gender-appropriate clothing statute. And this part is really fucking horrifying. Officers would take people suspected of cross-dressing into the bathroom and check their biological sex, which is wild. The raid then sparked this riot among the bar patrons and neighborhood residents as police were hauling all these people out of the bar, because everyone was just fed up. They were mad. Angry patrons were like, you can't keep harassing us. Neighborhood residents were like, you're here all the time. Just leave these people alone. And instead of dispersing like the police said, everybody just hung out outside and refused to move. And everyone became increasingly agitated as everything unfolded. And they saw how everybody inside the bar was being like aggressively treated by the police. So at one point, an officer hits a lesbian over the head, and she shouts to the onlookers, right? She's like, hey, like this happened. And the crowd starts throwing pennies, bottles, cobblestones, and other objects at the police. And famously, you know, Marsha P. Johnson, the Black trans woman, is the person who threw the first stone that launched the Stonewall riots. And within minutes, a full-blown riot involving hundreds of people began. The police, Village Voice writer, and a few like prisoners, basically at this point, were barricaded into the bar, and the mob attempted to set the bar on fire after breaching the barricade repeatedly. The fire department and a riot squad eventually came. They doused the flames. The people inside were released and dispersed into the crowd. But the protests continued for 5 more days. And these protests got huge. We're talking thousands of people. And they flared up at one point after the Village Voice published its account of the riots. And this really served as like a catalyst for the gay rights movements in the United States and around the world. So this all happened because of a gay bar. Like a gay bar, going to this bar like gave people the sense of community and maybe not necessarily safety, but the closest thing people had to safety at this time to like it, just be themselves, right? And also fight for like equality and equal rights. And post Stonewall, we also see like these gay bars continue to be a really, really important thing for queer communities. Like when AIDS started like ravishing the gay community in the 80s, these bars became the place that everybody got together and grieved the loss of their friends and raised money for people who were dying and took care of each other. And you know, there was crossover with lesbian bars where lesbians would volunteer to go care for gay men when nurses wouldn't touch or feed their patients. Lesbians would donate blood because gay men weren't allowed to. They would also have at these bars drag shows, right, for no pay, and they would just donate all the tips to the men who are suffering from AIDS. And this is like really important. And when I think about like how much the queer community has lost by losing gay bars, like there's only 27 remaining lesbian bars in the United States today, right? It is really sad because you can see that these are like important places for people's mental health, like to exist, to be able to go somewhere where everybody understands you and you don't have to constantly feel on guard. And I think that's like a really important thing. And that brings me to the final ish thing, which is the bar as the third place. But what do you think about all this so far?
I think you should. I think you have a thesis that's about to happen, but I have good news.
What
Is
is it?
all I was. Um. Well. Yeah. The bar is the third place. You talked about Stonewall, and you know, earlier I talked about the fucking insane the cabaret license thing where you
Mm-hmm.
literally it was illegal to dance, and that goes hand in hand with the idea of like men not being allowed to dance with each other, like the prohibitions that are put upon people. And like one of the stronger forces in getting that cabaret license repealed, which of course, as we said, was selectively enforced against marginalized communities, which of course would include gay people and people of color, was, have you ever heard of Disc Woman?
Mm-mm.
Disc Woman, like Disc Man, but Disc Woman is a DJ collective, DJ booking. Um, they're like kind of legendary. This person who I we don't know each other super well, but I have met them and they're lovely. Frankie Hutchinson is the pioneer of it, I believe, is the founder, and like was instrumental in getting like the forces behind getting that law repealed. And has Disc Women is like a collective that they're basically like, we rave culture, bar culture, nightlife culture needs to improve, and has done so much work in that space to like, it's about representing women, trans women, genderqueer people, queer people in general. And it's like this huge force that's like developed. Like they're, I don't know, obviously I'm not a raver, but like apparently has done so much good work. And actually like managed to make places safe. And there are these organizations. There's one called Outsmart, which is the pun, I believe, is like you're out, but you're gonna be smart while you're out. And it's a organization that's purely dedicated to educating bar staff um, about making bars safe places for people that might otherwise be marginalized, like women, queer people, people of color. Like there are all these things that are like forces that are like there because the bar, the nightlife has always been a haven. It's always been a safe space. Like I remember the Lexington in San Francisco, that was one of the
Yeah.
last gay bars. And also now, I know you said there's only 27 lesbian bars in the country, and that's true. But as we were talking about it the other day, like also two bars opened not that long ago near me that while they're not explicitly lesbian bars, they are absolutely queer and lean towards femme. Like, so it's, you know, it's they're the scope is broader, but they are absolutely supposed to be places where you can go and be gay and femme or a woman or whatever. You know, any place on the spectrum, like, and I've been in those spaces and they feel incredible. Like, my final thing is just that as a bartender of 15 years, I have always said, like, if you have a place that has that kind of vibe, that basically is like, this is not just for straight men, um, it makes it so much easier. The tips are better, the vibe is better, everyone is sweet. Like, it's community, and you know, it's undeniable. I've seen it played out a million times. So
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what the idea of a third place is. And that term, obviously, third place was coined in 1989 by Ray Oldenburg. And we talk about it kind of a lot on the podcast. But, you know, it's just a familiar public spot where you regularly are able to connect with other people that's not your job or your house. And this is really important because, you know, work hours become longer, commutes become longer, our communities got more isolated for a lot of people. And we have to leave our houses less and less and less. We can order things online, we can get delivery. And it just, we're so exhausted at the end of the day, many people from our jobs and our commutes, that these things feel like a chore we just don't have the energy for. And it makes us actually increasingly alone. And Oldenburg argued that you need a place outside of your home and work, and that it's essential for public health and public well-being and public mental health. And he said, when suburbia cries are for the means, what suburbia cries for are the means for people to gather easily, inexpensively, regularly, and pleasurably. A place on the corner, real life alternatives to television, easy escapes from the cabin fever of marriage and family life that do not necessitate getting into an automobile. And what really this brings to my mind is the Cheers TV show, right? Like, this is what Cheers was. Cheers was one of the longest running hit television shows in the 1980s and early 1990s. And it was just about a Boston bar. And there's this paper on the topic of third places that said the regulars were a racially homogenous but socioeconomically diverse group who laughed, told stories, confided problems, drank moderately, and blew off steam from the pressures of home and work. The theme song summed up both the series and the ideal third place is where you can go and everybody knows your name. And it turns out like around 3.5% of the American population in one survey said that for them, bars and pubs were their third place too. And I think about this a lot. I've been going to my neighborhood bar now for over 15 years before I even lived in this neighborhood. And the running joke from around 10 years ago is that I would always ask my friends to go there. They'd be like, what do you want to do tonight? Where do you want to go? And I always say this one bar. And then afterwards I'd say, because Cheers, you know, because I wanted to be in a place where everybody knew my name. And it's definitely like a place that fosters community. Like, I know the bartenders introduce residents of our neighborhood to each other. They're always there like, oh, you love this person, they live like 5 blocks away, this is what they do for a living, you guys should talk. And like, my favorite bartender there even keeps 6 seats at the end of the bar like permanently blocked off for neighborhood locals only, no matter how busy it gets. You know, it's like those seats are always for the locals. And it's walking distance, right? You can pop over there whenever you want to get out of the house. You can drink and you don't have to operate a vehicle. And I know, Tori, you have a neighborhood bar like this too. It's your version of Cheers, and it's right across the street from your house, right?
yeah.
And you know everybody who works there.
Yes.
And you even started to date somebody who worked there.
I started to date someone who worked there, and I have worked there without pay just because I was in the building and they needed someone. Just because I go there so often, they were like, hey, can you fix this problem we have downstairs or something like that? Like, it is community. Absolutely.
And you know, you meet other neighbors there, right? You know, other people who just live in the neighborhood that go there all the time.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's a great source of community. And it's, you know, there's always the argument about any new business, and this is a place that's been there for years and years, but any new business is inherently like a place for gentrification to coalesce around. Like, that's just how it works. If you open a new business in a neighborhood, it's
In
going to
Brooklyn,
change.
especially.
Sorry, yeah. I'm specifically talking about New York City, but there are ways to conduct, your business in a way that is still hopefully like inclusive and like allows for everyone who already lives there. Some people open a bar and they're not looking for that, and that's the inherent problem. And I was about to just say, it's like the only problem with a bar where everyone knows your name and people drink moderately is that no bar in New York City could stay open just based on that. And unless you own the building, the rent's
Right.
too
Well,
high.
and that's the thing with my bar here in LA is that they own the building. They've been there for years because
Yeah.
they own the building. And it's just one of those rare special gems where they're like, yeah, we don't even really need to make that much money. The building's been paid off for years. And it is very lucky. But I will say, like, even like on your walk to your bar in your neighborhood you've lived in for years and years and years, it's like I see, like, you talk to like your neighbors who are hanging out in front of their houses or like on the corner or on their stoop. Like, even if you're not talking to your neighbors at the bar, it's like going there, you're interacting with your community in other ways too, which is positive. And
Yeah.
like these types of spaces are like psychologically very, very important for people's well-being and people's health. Like there was this research of California students done in 2022, and it found that community spaces for these students were super fundamental supporters of psychological well-being. And part of this that another study has found is because we gain a sense of psychological ownership, meaning we feel a sense of influence and identity when we find a third place that matches our needs. And obviously that does have the potential to conflicted gentrification in a horrifying way, because it's like, yeah, if you make a bar, for example, or a third place that caters to the gentrifier and doesn't serve the local community that was already there, all of a sudden what you've done is created a way for people who've moved into this neighborhood to feel a sense of ownership over the neighborhood without integrating themselves into the systems that were there before them, right? And that's a problem. And it is hard when you get into socioeconomic issues when you're like, well, I'm broke. This is the neighborhood I can afford to live in. And I remember being that broke person who was moving in neighborhoods where it's like, this is the only place I can afford to live. And the solution was always like, well, service the same facilities that are there to serve the community that existed there before you. Like, don't try to change the makeup of the neighborhood. Like, don't let people cater to you, like make them cater to the people that have been there. But it feels futile in a lot of ways because gentrification is a policy issue and a private capital issue. And it's hard for individual people to combat that. It's like the most you can do is like talk to your neighbors, get to know people, and go to the spots that they go to. But yeah, these impactful third places ultimately allow for like community expression in lots of ways. And it also allows for like active participation in community. And all of that reinforces the individual as part of a community. And like that is really necessary for our brains to feel okay about the world. And even going back to like the 18th century or before, when we talk about these, coffee houses or pubs or public houses or whatever, this is where people were going just to like even exchange information or share the news or talk about what was going on. Like cafes were once even dubbed penny universities because they allowed experts and novices to sit side by side and talk about ideas and learn from each other. And your rank, your status, your literacy level, none of that mattered in these spaces. And that's the thing about third places is they could be a level playing field for anybody who enters them. Really, you might be the boss at your job, but when you go to your local bar, you're not the boss of anybody there. It's like these hierarchies imposed by society don't have to exist. And there are obviously social privileges and social hierarchies that can exist, right? But it's more of a leveling presence than the workplace or the home often can be. And it's like, those are the spaces that our lives are acted out in. We have homes, the private spaces of individuals and families. We've workplaces, that's just to generate economic resources for your boss and have your labor exploited. And then those third places that are neither of that, that's really the only opportunity we have for like personal enrichment and like outside of the home, obviously, and like community building outside of your family. And an interesting thing to me is that someone's workplace, someone's place where they go to get exploited, is also somebody else's third place. So it's like you, for example, are a bartender. You go to the bar to do your job, but other people come in that bar because it's their third place. And it really is this like cyclical kind of thing, a circular cyclical kind of thing. It's like, and then you might go into that person's place of work the next day, and it's just a very, very interesting relationship that somehow exists and feels community building even within a structure of capitalism, which is extremely rare because capitalism itself does nothing but destroy communities, right? But it's like somehow, despite this, it's like people just want to go somewhere and connect with other people. And a bar is a unique third place because people are drinking a little, so they do feel more relaxed. They feel more open to social engagement. It is a social lubrication element, and it has this effect of opening people up to human experiences they might not otherwise have. And some researchers have even started to find that third places foster social and economic mobility for marginalized communities. So this one report said third places connect people to networks of social capital, support, resources, and information that may lead to economic opportunities, professional connections, or support accessing services and benefits, particularly among historically marginalized and disadvantaged groups. So, for example, let's say you're a person looking for a job and all of your friends work a minimum wage job at Subway or McDonald's, and you go into your local third place, your local bar, and you start talking to somebody at the bar that you don't know very well. And you happen to mention, oh yeah, I'm looking for a job, but all these jobs pay minimum wage. And they're like, oh my God, the company I work at is hiring for an assistant. It's an administrative assistant. I think you'd be great for it. Starting pay is $65,000 a year. All of a sudden, that's a connection you've made that you otherwise would have been shut off of because of like the marginalization element. So that's kind of what this paper was trying to pinpoint, which I thought was really interesting that I hadn't previously considered. And there's also Dr. No. No, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, the two bars I currently work at both have, this is a different thing, but as far as community goes, both have hosted weddings of people who met at those bars.
Oh, whoa.
Like people met at those bars and met their, whatever you may think about the institution of marriage, they're ostensible life partners. And because that was where they met, they asked to have their weddings there. And like that included the community of the people around them. And like, there's no question that it has that, and there's no question it's my favorite thing is as a bartender to facilitate that kind of community. And the only time it's difficult is when the money's bad. And then it's but that's like all about who's tipping and who's not. And I know tipping is a whole other subject.
Yeah, I did a whole episode on tipping already once, but we'll get into some stuff at the end of it. We're almost wrapping up this episode. I know it's been a really long one, so we'll wrap it up. We'll end on some funner, lighter notes after we complete our thought on the third places. So there's this Dr. Torrey Lee, who's a postdoctoral scholar at the Population Research Institute of the Pennsylvania State University. We got a lot of Penn State going on in the sources today. And Dr. Lee studies the relationship between the built environment and psychological well-being and has conducted research on the impact of these types of third places. And she says one of the most important features of third places is social contact, like you're talking about, Tori, either directly or indirectly. In third places, you can enjoy direct social interaction with other people by chatting and enjoying activities with them. But alternatively, third places can consist of indirect social interaction, just being around or being surrounded by people. And that's something that I always like. It's like, I don't need to necessarily talk to every person in this bar, but I like being around other people. And either way, it's a method to combat the epidemic of loneliness that is really plaguing people. And this is something we talk about in capitalism a lot. It isolates us, it alienates us, it divides us into these small nuclear families and strips us of community and strips us of multi-generational family units. And in 2017, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy called loneliness a growing health epidemic. And in 2023, Murthy doubled down on this, raising alarm again, and released a Surgeon General advisory on the public health crisis of loneliness, isolation, and a lack of connection and its effect on mental, physical, and societal health. So this is a way that drinking could potentially, yes, positively affect your health, again, if done in moderation. And because it's a psychological thing that if you're going to a bar, if you're interacting with people, if you're around others, you're socializing, that's something that's good for you mentally. And it's also good for you physically. So there was this one study that, we think about this a lot with the elderly, like the loneliness epidemic of the elderly and how so many older people are left alone. But it doesn't just affect the elderly. It affects people of every age group. Like this one study targeted millennials and Gen Z. And it found reported increased feelings of loneliness in the past 10 to 15 years. And as many as 79% of 18 to 24-year-olds regularly reported that they felt extreme loneliness in the year 2022. And that's major because researchers have found that chronic loneliness can actually kill you. Like chronic loneliness is considered by researchers who have been looking into the psychological and physical effects of this. It's considered as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, every day for the rest of your life. It's considered as deadly as having a lack of exercise, high blood pressure, or excessive drinking, which I thought was interesting. So going to your neighborhood bar, yeah, it could save your life as long as you're not excessively drinking while you're there. So this has been a really long episode. This episode's been already an hour and a half longer than most of our episodes are. So thank you for bearing with me, Torrey. No, it's okay. I do a lot of research.
You've done a lot of research, and I made it longer by interjecting, but I hope that
you're supposed to interject. It's no fun if I'm just lecturing. You did your job by interjecting. It was good. And you taught me a lot about the chemical processes of alcohol that I did not previously know.
I have a wealth of other information to give. We could do a second. We could to make this a two-parter.
Well, I thought to wrap up the episode, we could do 3 things before we close. And if there's anything else you want to add in there beyond these 3 things, let me know, and then we'll do that too.
No, I'd just like to double down on the, just the idea of the, I am generally positive on bars.
Me too. I'm very pro bar.
Yeah. The number of people I know who have met other people, the number of people, like the community that it fosters is worth the difficulty that it entails.
Yes. So I thought we could end, the first thing we could do is we could have you rapid fire describe in like short verbiage different types of bars I've identified for listeners who might not know. And then we'll talk about just a few cocktails that are interesting. And then we'll end with you maybe giving your top 3 tips for bar etiquette for bar patrons as a bartender, as a service worker on the front lines of the bar industry.
Okay.
Do you like this plan?
I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
So wait. So first stage is types of bars?
Yes, types of bars. Okay, so the first one is inspired by a conversation you and I recently had with a bartender.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that also has a lot to do with Lizzie, who co-hosts the podcast sometimes. Lizzie has a love for this. It is a fish tank bar. How do you describe a fish tank bar? Yeah. Torrey, go.
I mean, the fish tank is just, tropically themed. There may be a fish tank, or it might just have the vibe of a fish tank. It is somewhat tacky, hopefully. It could be fancy. I don't know. There's a fish tank. There's
a fish tank in a bar.
There's a fish tank. There's blue hues on the walls, and probably tropical drinks, which, as we've discussed, have their specifically tiki, have their rough origins. But yeah, love the fish tank bar.
Okay, now how would you describe a dive bar? How do you categorize a dive bar? What makes a dive bar?
The thing about a dive bar is that there is a dive that is, there's a really old hostel dive, which is like a dive that is usually attended by old white men and is only comfortable for old white men. And that bar is dangerous to go into, but can be fun for a thrill. You can walk in and be like, fuck that. As long as you know it's like in an area that you will be safe, you can go in and be like, these people are going to make jokes about us as we walk out. Like, if you're in any way alt or anything other than an old white man. Those bars have their own. That's a cop bar, basically.
Cop bar. Oh,
there's
okay.
Also well, actually, okay, I will say this. Never go into a cop bar. There are bars that are cop bars. never go into a cop bar. You will not have a good experience. The one that's like old and grumpy men, you might have
I
a good
think
time.
the dive bar is like my brother's a cop bar.
Yeah.
Just like
It's
that.
like,
Yeah.
but oh God, one time I went into a bar and realized that it was literally a cop bar, wall to
Really?
wall. I was
Wait, we went to this bar in Manhattan and they were throwing like some celebration and it was like some cop party.
Oh, that was a different one, but yes, that was
Yes,
that.
yes. And
Yeah,
we were like, absolutely not.
nope,
Goodbye. Thank
this
you.
is
Goodbye.
terrifying. I
Yeah.
feel like, even with all my privilege, I feel like I'm about to get shot somehow.
Yeah.
Just like fucking terrible. But a proper dive bar is just lived in and cheap, and it's okay if you're a weirdo as long as you adhere to the etiquette rules, which we will get to in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So next, a suspender bar.
Okay. Well, that a lot of these don't exist as much as they used to, but that's
Oh,
the.
oh, there's a bunch in LA still.
Oh, really? Oh, I
Yeah.
thought. I mean, they've become corny. Like, I mean, just people make fun of them, and it's like the idea is just that we're going old timey, and I think the problem with the suspenders bar is that while the if the affect is done perfectly, like we went to Maison Premiere in New York
Yes.
City, in Brooklyn, which is this. It's a absinthe focused new or old school New Orleans bar, but the vibes and the attention to detail are impeccable. It's
And the
beautiful.
employees were so nice.
The service is incredible. It's top to bottom great. It's fantastic. So that's a good suspenders bar. But a bad suspenders bar is just some guy decided he wanted to make his bar fancy and put on suspenders. And I can't explain the difference, but it's you know it immediately.
It's about
And
authenticity.
yeah, one feels like it's attention to detail, the other feels like pretension. That's all I can say. Like,
Okay.
and
Quick
and
question.
you can make the drinks the not good suspenders bar, even if it has good drinks, you could make those drinks without all the trappings and it would be just as good. And that's the problem. Whereas
Okay.
the
Okay.
vibe, yeah.
I get it. I get it. All right. So, follow up question: is the suspender bar the same as a mustache bar, or are they different?
No, that's what I mean. It's a
You think
twirly
it's the same?
mustache. Well, I
Okay.
mean, it depends on the mustache. That's the whole point.
Okay.
There's also the mustache bar, which is a mustache and a mullet bar, and that the guys
Yes.
are all wearing Hawaiian shirts, and that's fun.
Okay.
Like,
What about a lab coat bar? I didn't know this was a thing until I went into
oh,
a bar and then I texted you. I just went into a bar and this guy was wearing a lab coat, and you're like, "Yeah, lab coat bar. That used to be a really popular thing."
yeah, that's Dave Arnold, who's like, I've got that book on my shelf, Molecular Mixology, and I have to say, it's kind of cool. They do cool shit at bars like that. It's just, again, how annoying is it? Like, if they're friendly and they're like, hey, we clarified this in a centrifuge, like, and it's delicious and the drink is good, like, that's cool. But it's sort of like, again, this is going to go to one of my main bar etiquette tips. But if you are looking for that experience, sure, let's geek out. Let's spherize some things.
Okay. So then next we have the sports bar.
That's great. If you're looking for sport, I mean, that's
They're
fun.
playing like they're just playing sports. That's the only thing that makes it a sports
Doesn't
bar.
I don't I mean, it just means are there TVs and are the TVs playing sports?
Okay.
And it means you will encounter a lot of intense masculine energy, but there's a way to enjoy that kind of thing, even if you're not into sports. Like I've gone with a lot of friends and just, if the game's on the thing and your friends are having a good time, you could be having a good time too. Like, and sometimes the people there appreciate the like, oh, there's like a weird group of kids in the corner and you can high five a stranger.
Okay. What about the Irish pub?
Well, I am technically Irish, but I don't have much Irish culture. I would say that's another case of the like dive bar with the old man in it, where it's like if you tread lightly and you are, you know, like you're going in there to experience the like. This is supposed to be. We went to a themed English pub, like English tavern, right? And it's
Yeah,
like,
we did.
yeah, and it's like, I don't know. It can be fun. It can also be annoying and potentially incredibly racist.
Okay. What about this will be the last one actually. This is my favorite and I think you coined this, but if you didn't coin it, one of your friends coined it and you told me this and I almost died laughing and this is the bar themed bar.
Bar themed bar. Yeah. And that is a dive bar that's only been there for a little while. And it's a bar that is decorated with garage sale or yard sale, depending on where you're from. Just like vintage neon, and it's made to look like a dive bar that's been there forever, but it is not. And again, this can go one of two ways. It can either feel incredibly sterile and weird, or it can actually be like, hey, we're just trying to make the vibe like it's like we're just trying to make you feel comfortable, and you just come in and it's unpretentious and there's beer and a shot, whatever.
Okay. So that was the bar rundown. The types of bars. There's more, obviously. There's so many more. We saw piano bars outside of that wedding. I never even heard of a piano bar. It's just where there's a piano bar and people were singing and playing piano. There's the arcade bar. I love an arcade bar. I befriended one of the owners of Barcade once, and he gave me a lot of free tokens, and that was really cool. There's all these different types of bars. But yeah, the thing after this that I thought would be fun to touch on before we wrap this episode up is just like cocktail stuff. Like we kind of touched on this when we were talking about after Prohibition, how like there was like a renaissance in alcohol, and a big way that renaissance manifested was with like a return to cocktails, right? Like people started to get really interested in cocktails again. And I thought it'd be fun for you to guess what the top 5 most popular cocktails in the world are right now, according to data.
Right now?
Right now. Yeah, this year. This year.
This year. Okay, well, I know one's the espresso martini.
Ding, ding, ding. Number 2 on the list is espresso martini.
Aperol spritz, but
no, not on the list.
Well,
no.
that I was going to say that's actually older.
Yeah.
So that was extremely popular a few years ago. It was the ultimate cocktail. You know what? I actually wouldn't know where to start on that. Like, I don't know where cocktail. Like, I can't say like a vodka soda, but like, so these are cocktails.
Cocktails, yeah. And the others are actually really classic. I'll put you out of your misery. I'll read them off.
Based on. I mean, like, if I said like martini and Manhattan.
Yes, those are both on the list. Number 3 is still a Manhattan, and number 5 is a dirty martini.
Okay.
So it's just what people are most likely to order, and we've got the new with the espresso martini, but the rest are actually old classics. People are still sticking to the basics.
Okay, I'm glad you gave me. Okay, so martini Manhattan, espresso martini. So I got 3 out of 5. You said 5. Classics. I'm blanking on what it would be. Old fashioned.
Old fashioned's number 1 on the list.
Okay.
Number 4 was the one that threw me off. Honestly, that's the only one you're missing. And it's kind of a doozy. I was like, people actually order this? Huh.
It's not Long Island iced tea. It'd be like a Mai Tai or no, something in the tropical vein, maybe. No. All right, you're gonna have to give it to me.
It is a White Russian, which I feel like people only order because it's a drink name they know. I think so much of ordering a drink is what drink names do you know?
I can tell you, like I said, alcohol is all about branding. And
yeah. Well, I thought that the cocktail thing was interesting. In 1806, speaking of old fashions, the first definition of a cocktail was printed, and it was a newspaper based in Hudson, New York. Yeah. And it was a newspaper called the Balance and Columbian Repository. Yeah. And they defined a cocktail for the first time. And do you know how they defined it?
Well, the way I've heard it paraphrased is a spirit with a bitter and a sweetener.
Yeah, a drink comprised of sugar, water, bitters, and a spirit of any kind. And they did this because somebody asked a question to the paper, what is a cocktail? And this is what the paper's editor, Harry Croswell, came up with. And then he followed it up by saying, it is vulgarly called bittered sling, and it is supposed to be an excellent electioneering potion. Electioneering. And as much as it renders the heart stout and bold, at the same time that it fuddles the head. And he was obviously just describing an old fashioned there. That's what he was describing.
Yeah, the old fashioned is the prototypical cocktail, like, or archetypal cocktail, excuse me.
Yeah. I also wasn't going to include this because it doesn't really make sense, but it was just like an interesting tidbit how the margarita was invented.
Is it about how it's a New Orleans sour?
No. So 1936, Prohibition, Americans started going to Mexico to drink, especially those who were close to Tijuana. By the time 1936 rolled around, obviously it was legal to drink in the States. You didn't have to go to Mexico, but a lot of people were like, let's go to Mexico. We should go back to Tijuana. So this newspaper man from the United States named James Graham and his wife go to Tijuana, and they go into one of these old Prohibition era bars, which was not owned by Mexican people. It was run by an Irish businessman called Madden. So a lot of people were like, oh, the Americans are going to Mexico. I'm going to go to Mexico and start a bar there for them. And he was known around the area for his tequila Daisy. And Daisy in Spanish is margarita. So he had created this, is what the legend says. Now, I heard you say before you could teach somebody to bartend in 3 hours. And I've always assumed that means there's some sort of formula for cocktail. So like when you were like, oh, it's like a New Orleans sour, blah, blah, blah. Is that do you say that because there's certain formulas cocktails follow and they're all kind of the same 5 ideas reimagined or something?
Yeah, and this isn't something that I came up with. I unfortunately do not have the citation, but yeah, it is the idea that there are a fundamental list of cocktails that just based on ratios work together, and everything else branches off of that. And of course, that doesn't mean there's a hard and fast rule. It shouldn't be prescriptive. You can make a good drink. If it tastes, all that matters, does it taste good? Okay, it's great. It doesn't have to be based on this stuff. However, there are fundamentals, and it's not supposed to be you have to follow these rules. It's supposed to be, if you can remember these basics, it's really easy to remember all the stuff that branched out from it. And that's all.
Got it.
And so the most common, the New Orleans sour, which again, I don't even know the origin of that term, but what I do know is that a margarita and a cosmopolitan and a sidecar are essentially the same cocktail. And that's all. It's about you have a base spirit and a citrus and orange liqueur or a triple sec or Cointreau. And these building blocks are they work. Even if they're very different drinks, it's about putting pieces together. And that's yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay, well, with that in mind, we're going to wrap the episode with both of us being very pro bar people, encouraging people to go to their local bar, drink moderately and responsibly, and have a nice time and make a friend or something. And with that in mind, Torrey, what are your top 3 tips for bar etiquette that people should know when they go out into the world and encounter someone like you standing on the other side of the bar making their drinks?
I'm going to narrow it down to 3.
You can give more. Free ball. That's fine.
No. But I mean, I'm going to go in order of operations here. The first one is know your bar. What are you looking for? What are you expecting? You don't go into the dive bar expecting a fancy cocktail. You can still order a shot and a beer at the fancy bar, but you'll probably be overcharged for it. It's all about do a little research, know what you're looking for. If you're open to the experience, it could be amazing. You and I walked into random bars and had a great time. It's just that. It's just don't walk into a place thinking you own the place. And it's not about places should treat you well, but also no. If there's a grumpy old man behind the bar, Like it's going to be a different kind of experience. And so just go in with knowing what to expect. The second would be, if it's busy, have your payment method ready. Have your order, have your order ready and have your payment ready. Like, before you get the bartender's attention, it is helpful for everyone for you to know exactly what you want and to be ready to pay for it. That's all. Like, because if you wave at me, which don't wave at a bartender also. But if I come to you and you then turn around and talk to your 7 friends and inquire individually what their orders are, you are wasting everyone's time. If it's a slow night, maybe we can talk about it and it's great. But just know what you want and know that you can pay for it. And the third is, unfortunately, tip your bartender.
Why is that unfortunate? That's not unfortunate.
I'm just saying, it's
tip your bartender.
The tipping thing is wild. There's a lot of discussion about it. Everyone should make a living wage, and I wish tipping structure, I wish money didn't exist, but right now it does. Right now it does. And there's a basic amount that's expected, and that is because of the society we live in. And I'm sorry, if you can't tip 20% at minimum, you shouldn't be going out to drink. And more importantly, a big tip on your first drink will always get our attention. And that's not because it's a bribe, because it shows thoughtfulness. And that leads me to, I guess, with the ultimate tip, which is just that bartenders are humans, and a little kindness goes a long way. We're service professionals, and we want to take care of you. We want every experience to go well. So if you are nice, I have bought thousands of strangers free drinks just for being nice over my career. All it took was them to be like, hey, you're working hard. I hope your night's good. And I'm like, you get a free drink just because you're kind. That's all it takes. Not that everyone's going to give you a free drink for that, but I guarantee you it will, a little empathy will improve your experience. That's all.
Okay. So with that, is there anything else you wanted to add to probably the longest podcast episode I've ever had? We're going on 4 hours here now on alcohol.
You're probably going to have to cut some stuff out, but
no, we don't edit. We don't edit.
Right.
We post.
Right.
We go straight to post.
Go.
So anything to add for the people to know that I definitely won't edit out.
That's it.
That's it. That's it. That's our episode on the bar. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can find us there at patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. For $3 a month, you can access bonus content there. But if $3 a month is too much for you to spend right now, we totally get it, and we're just happy you're here. As always, you can find the sources for this week's episode just by scrolling down a bit in the description.